Chapter 51. Don't underestimate the little girl. Charles, originally indifferent expression, froze for an instant, and slowly turned his head to look at Luo crossing. In the future, the famous Professor X will be so decadent. One of the main reasons is that the magic-shaped girl Ruiwin does not agree with his views and chooses to follow Magneto. Charles' originally indifferent expression froze for an instant, and slowly turned his head to look at Luo crossing. In the future, the famous Professor X will be so decadent. One of the main reasons is that the magic-shaped girl Ruiwin does not agree with his views and chooses to follow Magneto. Although he said that he didn't care and didn't want to go, he could never sit still when it came to the safety of the magic girl's life. If Magneto is friendship for Charles, then the magical girl Ruiwin has three parts of family, friendship and love at the same time. Don't you understand? Let Wanda obliterate the devil girl, so that the future will be saved. Liu Xing leaned against the table, embracing his arms. Good idea. If this coward doesn't want to help us, then just do as you say. Wolverine also stood beside Liu Xing at this time and agreed. He is not simply using the radical method on Professor X. If Professor X is really to this point and still chooses to be a trash that escapes reality, Wolverine will definitely choose to help Liu Xing obliterate the devilish woman Ruiwin for the sake of other mutants in the future. Only this little girl, what are her abilities? Charles forced a smile and turned his eyes to Wanda. Don't look down on the little girl. You will meet a little girl named Kin in the future. Believe me, that is a nightmare for all of us. Wolverine closed his eyes slightly and said to Charles, in his timeline, Kinjal was killed by his own hands because of the power of the Phoenix. When Kingirui was found by Professor X and Magneto, she was still a little girl. Don't doubt, even if the core of a Death Star is in front of her, she can destroy it. Liu Xing unabashedly helped Wanda brag about her ability, which made the Master a bit embarrassed by the sight. Wanda had just awakened his abilities and used it tentatively. He didn't even know where his limits were and whether he was as powerful as Liu Xing said. Try it. Charles took a silver wine glass from behind, put it on the table, and motioned to Wanda. Wanda looked at Liu Xing subconsciously, seeking his advice. Don't worry, you can do it at your fingertips. Concentrate your thoughts and strength. Liu Xing said with a smile to Wanda. Just kidding, the infinite gems, something that Thanos takes half a life to destroy with 6 gems infinity gloves. It only takes a few minutes to be completely annihilated in the hands of the Scarlet Witch. What a small silver wine glass is? At least get a vibrating glass or Edmund alloy glass to be worthy of identity, right? Click. Sure enough, with Liu Xing's encouragement, even Wanda, who had just awakened his ability, could easily destroy the silver wine glass. I join you, and I will try my best to stop her, even if she doesn't listen to me anymore. As the scarlet energy in Wanda's hand dissipated, Charles looked at the silver wine glass with no trace of residue left, and Charles spoke with a calm face. So we also need Magneto. In the future, you and him will send me back together. Wolverine looked at Charles seriously and said. 10 minutes later, Liu Xing and his team arrived in 2 cars to the Pentagon building, in front of the central building of the Ministry of National Defense of this country. The room that closed him was built during World War II. Its foundation is pure cement and sand, without any metal. He is locked under a 100-story building that is closely guarded. How are you going to get in? Charles leaned on the car door, looked at the towering building in the distance, and asked. Pete, it's up to you. Wolverine looked at Pietro. Pietro pointed at himself with a look of surprise. I mean, I have just gained the ability. Can I really do it? Yes, believe in yourself. In my memory, you can go anywhere in the world. This is just a back garden for you. Wolverine nodded in encouragement and patted Pietro on the shoulder. Go, bring your phone, call me if you have trouble that can't be solved. Don't try to behave. Liu Xing nodded his head when he saw Pietro looking down at him. SHIELD's Special Agent mobile phone, after being modified by Sky, not only has an internal network, but is also immune to signal shielding. With the technology of the 1970s, This black technology mobile phone is enough to explode all electronic computers. Wait, pardon me, your mutant ability is... Charles suddenly remembered and had seen the abilities of Wanda and Pietro, but Liu Xing's seemed to directly see him condense a humanoid soldier. I am not a mutant. As for my abilities, Liu Xing looked at Quicksilver Pietro, who had turned into a silver light and rushed into the Pentagon. If there is no accident, you will know in a while. Chapter 52 Sand Control, Basic. Hank McCoy pointed to a team in the distance and said to everyone, it's 73 years, and there is a simple black and white surveillance. In order to meet Pietro, they must also enter it. Hank McCoy pointed to a team in the distance and said to everyone, it is now 73 years. And there is a simple black and white monitoring. In order to meet Pietro, they must also enter it and solve the monitoring problem. Gentlemen and ladies, this building was built in. While the tour guide introduced the source of the Pentagon, he showed everyone around. At this time, Hank took out a small signal transmitter, ready to interfere with monitoring. Did he? After adjusting the antenna, Hank switched all the screens in the monitor to TV programs. Hello. There is a problem with the signal here. Please fix it if you have time. The people in the monitoring room didn't realize that this was an invasion. Instead, the boring monitoring turned into a TV show. After the report was over, they all watched the show in a happy mood. Without monitoring, Liu Xing and several people left the crowd and walked in the direction of the working elevator. You said just now that we will know your abilities later. Could that kid be discovered? Pressing the elevator button, Wolverine turned to look at Liu Xing and asked questions. That's what it means. Liu Xing did not deny, but directly admitted. In the original plot, Qian needs to wear goggles when running at full capacity to prevent eye damage, and even running too fast will cause nausea. So let alone Pietro, who has just gained the ability and hasn't even been familiar with it twice. Nausea, vision problems, these are trivial things. Maybe he will hurt himself if he doesn't control it well. After all, Pietro's speed is simply fast, not the superb power of the DC Flash next door. Speed is both power. Ding. Who are you? Halfway down the elevator, the door was opened. Before a few people could speak, they were knocked out by Wolverine. They closed the door and continued downstairs. So it seems that we have to speed up the efficiency. Wolverine wiped his fists and said, I don't like this. Charles pursed his lips when he saw this scene. If you have the ability, then we don't have to do it. Wolverine glanced at Charles and said, did he? The phone in Liu Xing's pocket suddenly rang. Wolverine and Professor X, who were bickering, looked at him at the same time. Pete, he's in trouble. Hank, Logan, catch Charles. Wanda, grab me. Liu Xing quickly reminded everyone, and then raised his right hand. The entire elevator and the wall turned into yellow sand, carrying a few people, and quickly began to fall. This is the most basic ability of the Desert Emperor's ascendant form, which can transform matter into sand that can be manipulated. The difficulty of transformation, from simple to difficult, is in the order of sand, soil and glass, stone and plastic, the remains of dead creatures, and metal. If you want to convert a piece of 1 kilogram of iron into gravel, the magic power consumed is enough to make Liu Xing transform a mountain. Coincidentally, this gauge for trapping Magneto has no metal at all, it is all cement and glass. For Liu Xing, it is easy to manipulate and transform these sands. Stop, don't move. The prison guard held a transparent plastic pistol, aimed at Pietro, who was vomiting while holding onto the wall, took out the plastic handcuffs, and slowly approached. Wow! What have you done? Under the horrified eyes of several prison guards, the plastic pistols in their hands and the plastic bullets in them all turned into sand and slipped from their fingertips. Sorry, brother Liu Xing, I let you down. Pietro heard the horrified call from the prison guards and knew that Liu Xing had come, rubbing his eyes injured by the fast movement, and turned around. This is a warning. Maybe I won't be able to save you next time. Liu Xing's voice sounded on Pietro's head. After a short delay, a large hole was opened in the top, and Liu Erxing and his team stepped on the flowing yellow sand and fell to the ground. Go and raise the alarm. The guard who had lost his weapon turned and ran to the side in horror, ready to press the alarm button. The wall of the Forbidden Army. Liu Erxing raised his hand with a wave, and the yellow sand scattered on the ground turned into a few sand soldiers holding shields, and directly pushed a few prison guards against the corner of the wall, unable to move. Okay, go ahead. Liu Erxing clapped his hands and said to everyone, your ability. Let me see another Eric. Charles stared at Liu Erxing completely, and slowly said, then you may be wrong. Liu Erxing shrugged. His sand control ability is just the foundation needed for other abilities to be used, which is fundamentally different from Magneto. 3 minutes later, everyone reached the bottom. If it is a man, go down 100 floors and succeed in the challenge. Here, he slept soundly. Looking at Magneto, who was lying on the blanket through the glass, Charles was full of mockery. Chapter 53 Mutants and Sentinels. Sitting on Charles' private plane, Liu Erxing took a sip of iced juice, and then handed it to Wanda, who was aside. They learn from Magneto that the magical girl is the best. Sitting on Charles' private plane, Liu Erxing took a sip of iced juice, and then handed it to Wanda, who was aside. They learn from Magneto that the most likely location of the Devil's Maiden was Paris, who was negotiating a mutant bill. In the time and space where Wolverine was originally located, it was at this meeting that the magician killed Trask, who had proposed the bill. But after killing Trask, the magician was captured and obtained DNA, which led to the birth of the Sentinel 30 years later, and the massacre of mutants 50 years later. It is also a coincidence that even though the rules of the Time and X-Men traversing through time and space are different, both of them will happen in 2023. So, in the future, those people will capture Iwin and use her abilities to make weapons, robots, also create concentration camps. Magneto King Eric gradually became cold as he listened to Wolverine. He is Jewish and has experienced this feeling before, so he feels the same without having Wolverine describe it carefully. Not to mention, the people who had followed him, the Angels, the Red Devil, and the White Queen, have all died due to massacres, experiments, and deception. Yes, the cause of all this is because of you. You changed Drew Iwin. Charles stared at Eric and said, I? Eric smiled, stood up with red eyes, and walked to Charles. Angel, Azuzo, Emma, Sirens. The mutant brothers and sisters are dead. Tested, experimented, and slaughtered cruelly. Where were you and Hank then? Hide. You can save them, but you abandoned them. As Magneto became more and more angry, the entire plane began to tilt and twist. Yes, will something happen if I fly by plane? Liu Erxing took out a tissue and wiped the clothes soiled by the juice in front of Wanda, silently looking at the two people who were arguing not far away. I think you can be my sister's boyfriend. We are all grown up anyway. Pietro saw this scene and suddenly said, Pete. Wanda glared at Pietro. Then his eyes flickered. Why do I think this is your excuse for going out in the future? Liu Erxing raised his eyebrows and saw through Pietro's careful thoughts. Sure enough, these children are precocious. Eric, Hank, who was flying the plane, yelled, and at this time he could no longer control the plane. But in the cabin, the two people who fell in love and killed each other were arguing, so how could they stop casually? Go stop them, please. Seeing that the persuasion was fruitless, Hank could only look at Liu crossing. No need, don't worry, just fasten the seat belt. He doesn't necessarily kill his life, right? Facing Hank's request, Liu Erxing did not make a move, but instead helped Wanda and himself pull out the seat belts and fasten them. I hope so. Hank was a little big-head, but glanced at the two people in the cabin and could only resign himself to fate. In the afternoon, Paris, in the capital, Dr. Trask faced representatives of a number of countries and began his speech. Congratulations, the war is over, but now we have another stronger enemy waiting for us. Your army is useless, and the country has no power to fight back. In order to deal with this new war, You need new weapons. I call them Sentinels. The Sentinel can identify and find the X gene of the mutant. The gene guidance system can target a target half a kilometer away, and unless it encounters a target that it can lock on, it will not attack any ordinary person. Open it here and it won't even react. With that, Dr. Trask took out a palm-beating instrument from his pocket and pressed the switch. Toot toot, an instant slap in the face. The small instrument immediately sounded an alarm. Unless ... here, there are mutants. Trask took the tester and slowly swept over everyone. When one person passed by, the signal of the instrument reached the maximum level. I promise you. The pointed man slowly stood up, and then turned into a weird woman with dark blue skin in full view. You angered me. Don't move. Don't shoot. Catch her. In a riot, the devilish girl entered the flock of sheep like a wolf and solved everyone in the room. Only Dr. Teslak, who proposed the bill, was left, holding the instrument and looking at her in shock. You will die. The witch took the pistol aside, and tremblingly pointed it at Dr. Teslak. This is her first murder, but she will not regret it, because she has read the bill, which is terrifying. Rywin, stop. At this moment, a voice came from the door, which caused the devilish girl's movements to stop. Liu Xing and his party arrived. Chapter 54. The world needs a villain. Seeing the sudden appearance of two old friends, the magical girl suddenly showed a surprised expression. A young officer lying on the ground next to him took the opportunity to take out the power grid in his arms and shot at the witch. But a weapon that can conduct electricity, naturally. Seeing the sudden appearance of two old friends, the magical girl suddenly showed a surprised expression. A young officer lying on the ground next to him took the opportunity to take out the power grid in his arms and shot at the witch. But weapons that can conduct electricity are naturally metal. Lie down. With a wave of Magneto's hand, the power grid returned to the young officer, who fell to the ground, convulsing constantly. He is... Wolverine saw the face of the young officer, and a memory emerged from his mind. Stryker, the one who will inject Edmund alloy into his bones in the future. Eric, be careful of them. Charles suddenly winked at Magneto and said, "They? Why?" Magneto looked at Liu Xing and others who Charles was looking at, frowning slightly. They threatened me once, saying that Rywin can be completely erased from this world, so as to ensure that the future happens. That little girl's strength is definitely not weaker than you. Charles stared at Wanda next to Liu Crossing. Although Liu Xing seemed to be only agitated at the time, he always felt that something was wrong, and a sense of crisis had been circling in his mind. But, I think he's right. Magneto suddenly interrupted Charles, raised his head to look at the devil, and with a move, the pistol flew from the devil into his hand. Eric, Charles, stop him. The magician looked at Magneto in disbelief. Sorry, he can't do it now. And you, the witch, as long as you are alive, there will be no peace in the mutant. Magneto smiled at the devilish girl and pulled the trigger. No, Eric. Charles' eyes widened. He only hated why he was incapable at the moment and couldn't stop it. Boom. Laugh. The bullet was blocked by a wall of quicksand that suddenly rose up. Even if Magneto used the ability to control the bullet, he couldn't continue to pass through the sand wall. I thought our thoughts were the same. Magneto turned his head to look at Liu Xing, and said, "Thank you, Liu." When Charles saw Liu Xing's move, he was relieved, and at the same time he felt guilty for the suspicion he had just made. Boom. While a few people were talking, the devil girl decisively chose to jump out of the window. Now Professor X is unable to control Magneto. Knowing that Magneto's power is terrible, she does not dare to stay at all, even if someone just tried to protect her. Maybe you can try to stop me. After Magneto spoke to Liu Xing, he floated and chased after him. Did he? Dr. Teslak on the side swept a few people with the mutant tester, and finally stopped on Liu Crossing. You are not a mutant. Teslak looked at the extinguished red light on the instrument and was shocked. Not a mutant? What was the method of manipulating the sand just now? Liu, please, stop Eric. Charles glanced at the beast tank who was chasing after him, knowing that the power of the beast alone could not fight Magneto. so he could only pin his hope on Luo crossing. At this time, Wolverine was emotionally excited when he saw Stryker, causing the Phantom Cat's ability to be in an unstable state. For a time, the two consciousnesses clashed, and the body could not be controlled, and he leaned against the wall. The rest of Wanda and Pietro followed Luo Xing and were mainly led by him. Actually, Logan, even if you reverse this future, how can you ensure that there is no end in the new future? Luo Xing ignored Charles' pleading, walked to the side of Wolverine, and said to him, "So are you going to let Eric kill Riven?" Charles said in pain, covering his head. "No, I mean even if there is no magic girl, as long as mutants still exist, the jealousy and fear of ordinary people will never disappear. Even if you save the world, when the era of peace comes, your abilities will become something that people are afraid of." Luo Xing was not alarmist. After Wolverine reversed the future, the new doom still came. In Wolverine 3 inches, because of the popularity of genetically modified foods, new mutants have been unable to appear. Professor X's dementia killed most of the students, and Wolverine's self-healing ability gradually became invalid. Ordinary people fear the power of mutants and want to erase mutants, but they are eager to gain and control the superpowers of mutants. What do you want to do? Charles gradually discovered the anomaly. Luo Xing didn't seem to simply want to erase the witch in order to save the future. He seemed to have more ambitious goals. "I can help you solve this problem, but I want to take away the magic girl and take her to another world without mutants," Luo Xing said. After repeated painful entanglements between the witch was killed, the mutants were extinct and the witch was taken to a world without discrimination. Charles slowly raised his head. "How are you going to solve this? It's very simple." Luo Xing glanced at the doctor who was holding the X-gene detector, and slowly walked to the window. "This world needs a villain, and I will be the villain." Boom! A golden light of the sun shone on Luo crossing. The dazzling light dissipated, and Luo Xing's ordinary clothing disappeared. The golden crown robe, long sleeves and fluttering flocks, a golden mysterious staff was held in his hand. Soaring mode, open. Chapter 55, Persecution Delusion. I don't know how Luo plans to become a villain. Even if I know it, I don't have the power to stop it. Charles looked at Luo Xing who was leaving, and leaned slowly on the ground against the wall. I don't know how Luo plans to become a villain. Even if I know it, I don't have the power to stop it. Charles looked at Luo Xing who was leaving, leaning on the wall and slowly lying on the ground. Having not experienced a dialogue with the future self, the young Professor X is too fragile in his heart to persuade himself to stop Luo Xing or Magneto. "Wanda, let's help." Pietro walked to the window and turned to his sister. "I advise you not to go." Wolverine gritted his teeth in the corner and resisted the pain consciousness for a long time, and said while resisting the pain, "Why, aren't you friends with that variety weird?" Pietro took a pause and looked at Wolverine suspiciously. "You are now mutants, and going there will ruin his plan." Charles looked out the window blankly, and said, "According to Luo, he wants ordinary people in this world to know that in addition to mutants, there are other superpowers. Only the supernatural can defeat the supernatural. Ordinary people's perception of the world is either black or white, and what Luo wants is to create this feeling for them. Therefore, there must be no mutants on Luo's side, at least not now." Even though Charles has lost his ability now, the memories of his ability to use his ability have not faded away, so he can see the heart of ordinary people very thoroughly. "And, in fact, in this world, that guy should be your father." Wolverine, who was gradually recovering, stood up slowly, patted his clothes, and said, "What?" Pietro looked at Wolverine with a dazed expression. "Our parents passed away a month ago. Besides, we are not from this world. How could that person be our father?" This hard to explain. Wolverine frowned for a moment, and found that with his limited IQ, he couldn't make it clear. "No, it's very simple." Charles helped Wolverine to stand up and walk towards Wanda and Pietro. "Why did you have the X gene when you came to this world?" But he didn't. Your siblings and mutants must have an inseparable relationship. What relationship? Wanda and Pietro asked subconsciously. This involves a blind spot in my knowledge. Perhaps only Luo, who can travel between the two universes, knows how our world is related to yours. And how you are related to mutants. Charles passed the brothers and sisters, walked to the window, and looked outside. On the square outside, Hank, the beast who was the first to jump out to stop Magneto, was tied to the central fountain by a few iron pipes, unable to move, and was taken by passers-by. Are we going to race who will find her first? Magneto was floating in the air, with various metals floating around, looking at Liu Xing, who appeared opposite him. The witch-shaped girl has transformed into a passerby and hides around her. Unless Professor X recovers her abilities, no one can find her immediately, unless I just left a small wire on her. The corner of Magneto's mouth raised slightly, and his gaze gradually turned to a person not far away. In an instant, countless steel around was turned into sharp blades, all shot at the ordinary passerby. No, Eric. Under the fear of death, the magician woman could no longer maintain her transformation and turned back to her prototype, her eyes full of fear. Ding! Exclamation mark. An ear-piercing metal crash sounded through the square, and the scream made people have to cover their ears. I am not dead. The witch looked at her hands in shock. At this time, her body was covered with a layer of flowing gravel, which covered her whole body like armor, and the steel controlled by Magneto couldn't cause any harm to her. Thank you. The witch looked at Liu Xing, who was walking towards her, and thanked her. You still can't help but shoot. Do you know the consequences of doing this? Magneto floated in front of Liu Xing and looked down at Dao condescendingly. With this sentence, you should ask yourself, you are not the limit of mutants, and mutants are not the limit of strength. Liu Xing waved his hand, and a wall of the Forbidden Army emerged from the gravel, repelling all the steel. Eric, Luo can take Rywin out of this world, don't kill her anymore. Magneto was about to speak, suddenly a familiar voice rang in his mind, making him look back at the distant building. Sure enough, Charles was staring here on the windowsill, but his complexion was not very good. He was enduring extreme pain just now, and only barely activated his ability once under the suppression of the drug. Are you going to take her into your world? Eric stared at Liu Xing completely and asked. Yes, Charles has recovered his abilities. Liu Xing glanced at several people watching from a distance and nodded. Then I can't let you do what you want. Charles is too naive. Are you going to take the magic girl to another world to develop the weapon called the Sentry, and then to conquer us? Are you? Magneto roared in the air, showing everyone what is called concentration camp, PTSD and persecution delusion. Chapter 56 Rise. Sun Disk. Otherwise, you will see my true power. I don't want to make those two gifted children sad. Magneto has issued an ultimatum to Luo Crossing. Perhaps there is a certain fetter, but he is actually true. Otherwise, you will see my true power. I don't want to make those two gifted children sad. Magneto issued an ultimatum to Luo Crossing. Perhaps there was a certain fetter. He actually paid attention to Pietro and Wanda, who were his sons and daughters in the set. At this time Magneto and Liu Xing's duel was watched by thousands of eyes. Not only Charles, Wolverine, Wanda and Pietro in the building behind him, but also the passers-by who were not afraid of death, were holding their cameras madly. Take pictures. Your real power, is it to control the magnetic field? If you can do it, you won't put iron pieces in your shoes. Liu Xing put his hand on the devil's shoulder and hooked his finger at Magneto. If you want, you can do it. You made the wrong decision. Magneto took a deep look at Liu Xing, then raised his hands flat, and the whole ground began to vibrate. Do you want to borrow steel bars underground? Liu Xing smiled faintly and dropped to the ground holding the golden staff. With Liu Xing as the center, the ground beneath his feet quickly turned into golden gravel. Under the bondage of the gravel, the steel bars that exist in it cannot be taken out by Magneto. Your ability is nothing more than that. Magneto looked down on the ground and found that Liu Xing turned into gravel on a piece of ground in front of him. and he couldn't help but sneer. At the same time, where there was no gravel further away, the ground cracked, and countless steel bars were pulled out from the ground by Magneto, and they flew to Liu Xing at extremely high speed. I just don't want to simply waste my magic power on basic abilities. Does this give you confidence? Liu Xing looked at the excited Magneto in the sky, held the scepter in his hand, and waved forward. Boom! The gravel on the ground quickly formed sand soldiers and rushed towards the sky, with a human wall resisting the steel bars, and at the same time, sand soldiers armed with long spears continued to attack Magneto. Magneto seems to be powerful, but it is just a crispy mage. Once the body is injured, even a single bullet is enough to cause him serious injury. Seeing this scene, Magneto hurriedly reversed the metal, and the metal that had attacked Liu Xing moved in front of him, forming a defensive iron wall. Too frightening. Are they gods? What about the army? Why hasn't anyone stopped them yet? It's so cool. It's much more interesting than those movies. God, is this a demon or an angel? Please tell your followers. The onlookers were directly shocked by the battle scene between Magneto and Liu Xing, but everyone's thoughts were different. Broadcast notice. Please evacuate in an orderly manner immediately. Broadcast notice. Please evacuate in an orderly manner immediately. A fallen horn on the ground gave a reminder, but few passers-by left, still hiding in a nearby building carefully watching the rare gods fight. Warning, warning. You have violated the French law. Please put down your weapons and surrender immediately. To reiterate, please lay down your weapons and surrender immediately. Otherwise we will take action. Not far away, on an armored vehicle, an officer shouted to Magneto and Liu Xing with the horn. I have to say that the speed of the army's dispatch this time is indeed unexpectedly fast. But in fact, it was expected. After all, in the distant building, there are high-level officials from various countries sent to discuss the bill. If something happens, they cannot afford this international fishing vessel. Hearing the warning from the evangelical army, Magneto slowly landed in front of the army, and the evangelical soldiers all raised their weapons and aimed at him. Thank you for sending me weapons. Magneto smiled slightly, and then raised both hands. All the assault rifles, bazookas, and grenades were all separated from the soldiers and flew into the air. Run. You can't beat Eric. The devil girl in the gravel could not move, but she still saw this scene and hurriedly shouted to Liu crossing. Just the steel bars in the city. Perhaps these gravel can still resist, but the bombing of thermal weapons is definitely not supported by ordinary capabilities. Otherwise, there will not be so many mutants under Magneto's death. So, Miss Ruiwin, have you considered it? Do you choose to leave this mutant world? Liu Xing stood still in the face of the sky's flames. If you can live. The witch has given up resistance, and at the same time, she has completely lost hope for the Magneto who tried every means to kill her. So, Liu Xing patted the gravel on the devilish woman's body, and she staggered out. Are you ready to lift the defense and wait for death? The magical girl looked at the firepower covered in the air, with a bit of bitterness at the corner of her mouth. Rise from the gravel. The magic power of Liu Xing's wand was surging, and dozens of tall buildings around him collapsed and turned into gravel. Then, under the horrified gaze of everyone, the collapsed building turned into a mysterious building, and a golden wheel that looked like the sun was suspended on each pedestal. Sun Disk. Chapter 57. The Ascension Ceremony. The center of the sun disk shot out a bright light, directly evaporating all the firepower in the sky to ashes. This is the real power of the Ascended. Liu Xing exhaled slightly, feeling the magic power in his body, and looking into the distance. The center of the sun disk shot out a bright light, directly evaporating all the firepower in the sky to ashes. This is the real power of the Ascended. Liu Xing sighed slightly, feeling the bottoming magic in his body, and looked at Magneto in the distance. Magneto constantly controlled the weapons of the evangelical army to fire at Liu Xing, but any firepower, as long as it enters the range of the sun's disk, it will be melted instantly. Seeing this scene, even Magneto, who had always been very self-esteem, couldn't help taking a step back. At this moment, he didn't dare to return to the place to face Liu Xing again. Who knows if he stepped into that area, would he also be evaporated by those terrifying golden discs? If there is only one chance to defeat Liu Crossing. Magneto thought of something, leaving the army aside, flew to the building where Wolverine and others were. Charles, I need your help, and he can't let him take away the magic girl, otherwise we will not encounter genocide, but the invasion of the world. As soon as Magneto hit the ground, he immediately walked to Charles and held his shoulder. You think everyone is too evil, Eric? Charles smiled bitterly and shook his head, and with my current situation, I can't help you at all. He said he wanted the world to feel his threat, so as to correctly recognize the need for mutants. Wolverine glanced at Magneto. So, he is helping us. Yes, we can also testify, Pietro said. Although Big Brother Luo is not a good old man like Steve Rogers, he is definitely not a villain. Just take the liberty to ask who is Steve Rogers? Charles asked. It's the first superhero in our place. He crushed the Nazi fascist Hydra and died heroically, Pietro said. Then he is indeed worthy of respect. Charles nodded slightly, then looked at Magneto. Are you still killing Ruiwin and Luo? How did you make me forget the knife hanging on our mutant head? Magneto snorted and asked back. As long as the knife is not cut at us, and can even help us, what about hanging it over the head? Charles said with a smile. Humphrey. Magneto walked to the window, looked into the distance, and couldn't help but snorted. His goal has been achieved. What happens? Several people walked back to the window again and looked at the place where Liu Xing was in the distance. Facing the approach of Liu Xing, the Far Country army lost all their weapons and raised the white flag. Sure enough, the hardest battle in the world is to defeat Fago before he surrenders. Liu Xing casually used the ancient power of the Sun Disk to evaporate all the weapons and armored vehicles of the Enamel army, and made a spit pouch. Hearing Liu Xing's mutter, the devil-shaped girl couldn't help laughing. Don't laugh, stand in the middle, this force can't be wasted. Liu Xing also did not expect that after solving Magneto, the original duel with national forces would end so quickly, which caused him to inject too much magic power into the solar disk. Huh? What are you going to do? The witch-shaped girl was taken aback, and was pushed by Liu Xing to the center of the urban desert. In my world, people with superpowers are generally called superheroes. But to be honest, in addition to your ability to transform, you also have a better physique than ordinary people. So, I am going to get you promoted. Liu Xing's sleeves fluttered and fluttered in the yellow sand, and all the surrounding sun disks glowed brightly. The soldiers of the Far Country who were retreating in the distance saw this scene, thinking Liu Xing was going to strike again, and fled. Accept this power. Boom! Exclamation mark. A ray of destructive power that was different from the previous destructive power shone on the devil female Ruiwin from the sun disk. The dazzling light and mysterious aura made her blindly cover her eyes and kneel down. In the ancient times of Runeland, the Protoss borrowed the power of the heavenly crown to draw the power of casting the Dragon King, allowing mortals to forge the sun disk to obtain immortal power, and the mortals who obtained this power were called Ascended Ones. This ceremony is called the Ascension Ceremony. If the Starcast Dragon King is degraded and regarded as the tail beast of the Naruto world, Liu Xing is now a perfect form of human pillar power, and the Ascendant of Runeland is equivalent to the golden and silver horns that have eaten the meat of the Nine Tails. And the magical girl who is currently undergoing the Ascension Ceremony is at best the forged human column like Hong who has been implanted with a small amount of Untitled chakras. Ah! The witch made a painful cry. Under the sun's disk, her blue skin was gradually evaporated, and her short red hair gradually fell off, and even the genes in her body were being transformed and purified. I don't know how long it took, perhaps as long as a century for the magical girl. When the sun disk finally stopped irradiating, after the magic power was exhausted, the sun disk and base all turned into yellow sand, which disappeared with the wind. Pali, from now on PM 2.5 Chapter 58, the magical girl returning to normal. You, What did you do to me? You erased my ability. The witch Ruiwin has a tired face. What did you do to me? You erased my ability. The devilish woman Ruiwin got up from the ground with a tired face, looked at her long-lost white arms, and looked at Liu Xing in shock. You can try it yourself. But it's better to change out a dress. Liu Xing waved his hand, and the sand condensed into a mirror in the air. The witch looks at herself in the mirror. She has blonde hair and a graceful figure. Isn't this her most common form of ordinary people? After she lost the X gene, could it really be this posture? She didn't think much about it, and subconsciously added a long skirt to herself. My ability hasn't disappeared. The devilish girl Ruiwin was stunned, staring blankly at herself in the mirror. Since her birth, she has been abandoned, discriminated against, and feared because of her blue skin. Finally, after so long, she got used to this blue skin and didn't care about the strange eyes of ordinary people. As a result, you tell her now that she has become an ordinary person again, and the ability has not weakened at all, even stronger. With a simple wave of her arm, the magician found that her power was uncontrollable for a while. It's not just pure power. Your abilities have yet to be developed. Liu Xing stepped forward and patted the somewhat stunned devil-shaped female Ruiwen. Let's go. It's time to end. Go and say goodbye to them. I know. The magical woman stepped on her feet and ran to keep up with Liu crossing. Even though she was already cautious, small pits were still shaken out of the sand. Fortunately, the witch's shoes and clothes were all deformed, essentially equivalent to her body strength. Otherwise the heel would have broken. Thank you, you gave me a new life. When going upstairs, the devilish girl suddenly said something to Liu crossing. Is the power familiar? I have good control. At least I don't have to worry about the floor of my house later. When Liu Xing stopped, he turned his head and glanced at the feet of the devil, and found that there were no cracks on the ground, and nodded in satisfaction. Go to your world. Can you let me live an ordinary life first? Please. The witch-shaped girl suddenly thought of something, grabbed Liu Xing's hand, and pleaded. She did not resist using her abilities, nor was she unwilling to do things for Liu Xing, but she wanted to enjoy the feeling of an ordinary person that she had never experienced before. How is your education? Liu Xing felt his chin for a while and asked. I learned a lot in the college, not just controlling my ability. As long as it's not teaching history. The meaning of the witch is very clear. Her ability is only to transform. In order to match her transforming ability, she learned a lot. After all, if you want to imitate a person, you need to imitate not only the appearance, but also the character, the tone, and the most important thing is the skill. For example, this time, she became a South Vietnamese military officer. If she did not speak the South Vietnamese language, she would be exposed in an instant. In general, the devilish girl is essentially a super acting school plus a tyrant. That's okay. I think there is a position that suits you well. I'll talk about it then. Liu Xing nodded to the devil, and then pushed the door open. Dr. Teslak, Officer Striker, and special envoys of various countries who were originally inside were all thrown out by Magneto. Now only the people who should be are left. Ruiwin, you should focus on your abilities. Magneto saw the devilish girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, and thought that she had become like this again with her ability, and immediately spoke. But the witch did not excuse. She went to the center of the table and sat down and looked at the two of them. Eric, Charles, I am leaving this world soon, and now I am here to say goodbye to you. Magneto made a move and a piece of iron flew over Liu. A trace of panic flashed in the eyes of the magic woman, and she hurriedly looked at Liu crossing. Don't be afraid, I don't have a sun disk. He doesn't have a bazooka. He still can't break my defense. Liu Xing waved a sand screen casually and blocked the devilish girl. Now Liu Xing has lifted the Ascension mode, but it doesn't mean that he will be afraid of Magneto. Entering the soaring mode is as simple as running for him. He just wants to take a walk now. After all, even those inferior ascended ones in Runeland can maintain their ascending form forever. let alone the billows. I just want you to take it away. Magneto turned his head and threw the bullet on the table a little uncomfortably. It has just been stained with a bit of her blood. It is still dangerous to stay in this world. This piece of iron is on the window. When the magic girl jumped out of the window before, it scratched a bit of skin and left a bit of blood on it. Well, is there anything else to say? Liu Xing silently took the iron piece and handed it to Pietro, who was holding it. Enjoy life, Ruiwin. Charles pursed his lips and nodded to the witch. You too, take care too. Try not to risk following him. Magneto surprisingly did not say goodbye to the devil, but turned to Pietro and Wanda. All right. Pietro thought of what Charles mentioned earlier, that Magneto was their father in this world, and he nodded to satisfy his thoughts. By the way, give you something. Liu Xing took out a scale and threw it to Charles. If you encounter an old immortal who comes out of the pyramid and can't beat it, you can use this to pray and you can contact me. But you will pay a certain price. Can you see a new future? Wolverine looked at Charles holding Galakrond's scales, suddenly a little surprised. Guess whatever you want. We are going back anyway. Liu Xing shrugged and said. Chapter 59 Triple Task Reward. Wolverine's voice gradually became weak. As the future changed and the sentry no longer appeared, then the Phantom Cat would no longer maintain his consciousness, and he would soon return to his original body in time and space. Wolverine's voice gradually became weak. As the future changed and the sentry no longer appeared, then the Phantom Cat would no longer maintain his consciousness, and he would soon return to his original body in time and space. Boom! Wolverine fell to the ground. Are you okay? Pietro was taken aback, and hurriedly rushed to support Wolverine. Wolverine shook his head, raised his head and looked at the other people questioningly. Who are you? Why am I here? Okay, it looks like he's gone, and we should go too. Liu Xing snapped his fingers. Okay, now they all stand by my side. Upon hearing this, Wanda and Ruiwin stood on both sides of Liu crossing. Can you stand up? Pietro carefully let go of Wolverine and stood behind Liu crossing. Don't say goodbye to them. Charles raised his eyebrows at the confused Wolverine. Wolverine saw Charles' familiar face, cursed, turned and left. The Wolverine of the future has gone back, and the current one is just someone who doesn't know them at all. By the way, stay alive and develop your abilities. I'm sure I will need your help when I get into trouble in the future. Liu Xing thought of something and said to Charles and Magneto before leaving, Thanos itself is actually not terrible. There are many ways to defeat him slowly, but the problem is that Thanos is not a lone hero. Even if it is all the superheroes who gather in the main universe, in the face of a large-scale army invasion, it is still only a drop in the bucket. In that case, Liu Xing had a very simple plan. What should I do if I can't beat it? Shake people. Anyway, Liu Xing has extra-dimensional magic. As long as he has coordinates, he can communicate in thousands of dimensions. When Thanos came, Liu Xing made a call, and hundreds of powerful men from all dimensions were dancing on his spacecraft. Isn't it beautiful? Your world will be in big trouble too? Charles asked with a smile. It's a big trouble. I'll talk about the specifics later. Goodbye. Liu Xing wouldn't talk to them about Thanos now. In the final analysis, Thanos started his fingers because the universe's resources are limited and the population continues to grow. If Thanos knows that in addition to destroying half of the population, plundering resources in other universes can also solve this problem, he might change his goal immediately. It's a pity that Liu Xing is the only one who knows extra-dimensional magic. For Liu Xing, all dimensions are his ranch. It is impossible for him to grab the eggs from one basket for Thanos and put them in another basket. The stars flashed by. Liu Xing disappeared in this world with the devilish girl, Wanda, and Pietro, as if they had never been here. However, Liu Xing's memory left to the world today will definitely prevent countries in the world from falling asleep in 100 years. Being in peace, Charles, Are you going to continue to inject your medicine now? After Liu Xing and his party left, Magneto looked at Charles and asked. No. Charles sat down slowly, leaning on the chair, and took a deep breath. There is still an unknown threat in the future, and he cannot give up his ability to save everything in order to be able to walk. By the way, did we forget something? Magneto looked suspiciously at the city covered by yellow sand outside. Do not know. Charles froze for a moment and shook his head. Hank McCoy, who was tied to a fountain to eat a sandstorm in the square downstairs. Am I? Complete the Witchcraft series missions. Source of the Sentry. Let the witchcraft disappear completely, and completely solve the future threats for the mutants. Get the task reward Shape Changer Nicole's help. Get additional rewards for the task World Shuttle. Complete the hidden conditions. The faithfulness of the demon girl is greater than 70%, and receive a special reward Whispers of the Ancient Gods. As soon as Liu Xing returned to the original world, he completed a series of tasks in an instant. What made him a little surprised was that in addition to the double reward for completing the Devilish Girl quest, there was actually a hidden quest. To be honest, Liu Xing didn't know until now that it turned out that the mentally handicapped mission system had hidden mission settings. Didn't he lose 100 million in the past? The hidden missions of Captain Marvel and Halo are definitely better than the rewards of the magical girl. Right? Toot toot. As soon as Liu Xing finished checking the task and before receiving the reward, the phone rang. Nick Fury? Does this guy install the monitor? Is it so punctual? Liu Xing glanced at the caller ID, and was a little speechless. He answered the call. Hello. You better not tell me you installed surveillance in my mobile phone. Chapter 60 Earned a Street. Did you know, as long as you are on the Earth, or even in extraterrestrial orbit, it is impossible to have no faith. Did you know, as long as you are on the Earth, or even in extraterrestrial orbit, there can be no signal? Nick Fury's voice came on the other side of the phone. So you called me for a few hours? No, I just turned on the unlimited continuous dialing mode on my phone and put it aside. Well, there is nothing wrong with Tony Stark. It is estimated that he will be back by himself in a while, so don't worry about it. Liu Xing curled his lips silently, and after answering, he hung up the phone. Shentiu Unlimited Continuous Dialing Mode. What are the scientists at S.H.I.E.L.D. doing to develop this useless mode? Are you cheating on R&D funding? No wonder that all modes of Nick Fury's car in the future are broken, and the air conditioning mode is well preserved. These scientists are afraid that they are not all taught by hand. Okay, go home. Liu Xing stopped a taxi and greeted a few people to sit in. 10 minutes later, Liu Xing and his team returned to their residence in Queens. You are back. These two are Wanda and Pietro. Sky heard the sound of opening the door and walked into the living room wearing a kitchen apron. When he saw the brother and sister who had grown up suddenly, he was stunned. Yes, it was an accident. Anyway, the school probably won't be able to go. Liu Xing opened the refrigerator, took a few cans of iced drinks and threw them to several people. That's great. Pietro was overjoyed when he heard that there was no need to go to school. So they are just 10-year-old minds? Seeing Pietro's appearance, Sky immediately understood. Are you going to ask them for a tutor? Pietro hurriedly appeared in front of Liu Xing. No, brother, I don't need tutoring. I can study by myself. Okay, you learn by yourself. I only find a tutor for Wanda. Yeah, long live. Liu Xing surprisingly agreed, causing Pietro to jump up excitedly. So happy? I have good news to tell you. The invisible woman Susan walked over with a stack of documents and handed it to Liu Xing. Not long after you went out today, a woman came over and let me pass these to you. Paper boss, isn't that the old look of Tony? Liu Xing turned the page directly to the last signature place, and when he saw the name, he looked up at Susan. She knows I went to Tony Stark. This document, turned out to be the real estate certificate for the entire street, was all bought by Pepper Potts and transferred to Liu Xing. It's no wonder that Nick Fury called me. It turns out that this guy has a big mouth again. Liu Xing remembered the phone call just now, and suddenly understood. But this is also just right. Pete, don't you want to teach yourself? Give you this opportunity. You can choose any place on this street, whether you open a shop or rent it out, and support yourself. Also, you have to take the ACT American University admissions test before the age of 18. Now, even if you are 16 years old, there are still 2 years left. As Liu Xing finished speaking, the smile on Pietro's face gradually disappeared. God is still 2 years away. Yesterday, he was still learning addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division in elementary school. After 2 years, he would take the college entrance examination. Brother, you are kidding, right? Pietro trembles a little while holding the drink can. Don't be afraid, your speed is not just physically. Guess what would happen to you if your brain couldn't keep up when you used your abilities before? Liu Xing knows very well that Qian's speed is purely fast, which means that his brain's processing speed must also keep up with his body. What do you mean? Yes, in essence, you are now an existence that has started the accelerated learning plug-in. Doing anything will get twice the result with half the effort, provided that you are willing to learn. Liu Xing nodded and said, then I promised. When Pietro heard this, he decisively chose to agree to Liu Xing's conditions. Since he can open the hangar, what's to be afraid of? Isn't it just 2 years to participate in the act? If you agree to this condition, you can have your own house, no longer need to be controlled by others, and you can go out everywhere. Think Pietro'd rules. That one. Pietro stepped forward and flipped through the real estate certificate sent by Pepper, and when he saw one of them, his eyes lit up. He'll choose this one. The bar does not need to be rebuilt. Although the law stipulates that you cannot drink before the age of 21, as long as he is the boss. Who cares about him? Fine. Liu Xing pulled out the real estate certificate and threw it to Pietro, then looked at the magical girl and Wanda, who were aside. Wanda, your ability has nothing to do with brain development. You can only let Ruiwin make up lessons for you. It shouldn't be like your brother, thinking about going out all day, right? No, I will study hard. Wanda shook his head quickly and hurriedly denied it. That's okay. I used to consume a lot of money. I'll go back to my room to rest and call me again after eating. Liu Xing waved his hand to everyone, turned upstairs and walked into the bedroom. As soon as he returned to the bedroom, Liu Xing jumped on Simmons, not exhausted at all. Check out rewards. Chapter 61 Fairy Mode Curse of Flesh. Get additional rewards for the Task World Shuttle. Complete the hidden conditions. The faithfulness of the demon girl is greater than 70%, and receive a special reward. Whispers of the Ancient Gods. Extract. Get additional rewards for the Task World Shuttle. Complete the hidden conditions. The faithfulness of the demon girl is greater than 70%, and receive a special reward. Whispers of the Ancient Gods. Extract. A witchcraft mission has 3 special rewards, and none of them seem to be tasteless. Shape chain a middle. Nicole's help. After using it, randomly obtain 1 from contract 1 Hua Psychic, skill Natural Magic Charm, and scroll formation of Vasti Xiarui. Are you still holding a lottery? Liu Xing looked at a faint green sphere in his hand and crushed it speechlessly. Obtain scroll formation of Vasti Xiarui. Scroll formation of Vasti Xiarui. It records how Vasti Xiarui, who was able to fight against the giants from the sky, was formed in the ancient times. History book. Or Liu Xing opened the scroll, and the magic words in it turned into a stream of light, which merged into his consciousness. Sure enough, it's a new force. After a long while, Liu Xing slowly opened his eyes. The so-called Vasti Xiarui were actually the first batch of talented human races in Runeland. They entered the spiritual realm, absorbed natural energy, and finally turned into various animal forms. Is it familiar? That's right. Power goes to the same destination by different paths. and the formation of Vastyuxiaru is very similar to the fairy model in the Naruto world. It also draws natural energy, and it also has an animal form. The difference is that the fairy mode of Naruto world has a maintenance time, and once it becomes an animal, it means that the energy in the body is imbalanced, and it will not only lose consciousness, but also lose life. As for Vastyuxiaru, after absorbing natural energy, there is not only no time limit, and even the power it obtains is far beyond the fairy mode, which is enough to be comparable to the gods. This is simply another mode of ascension. Liu Xing suddenly became a bit speechless. He now has the ascended form of the high-end version of the tail beast mode, and the high-end version of the immortal mode of Vastyuxiaru's cultivation method. Is the next step the high-end 6-channel model? Forget it. Look at the next one first. Liu Xing took out a piece of cloth with a faint luster. World shuttle, go to a random world. Note: this item is a one-time consumption, no round-trip service is provided. Simple and clear. I like it. Liu Xing put the world shuttle into the storage space. Can't go back and forth. That is not a problem at all for Liu Xing, who has extra-dimensional magic. Rather than saying that this is a world shuttle talisman, it is better to give Liu Xing an dimensional coordinates. But there is no need to use this thing yet. The last one, the Whispers of the Ancient Gods. It doesn't seem to be a good thing to hear the name. Isn't it a tentacle monster? Liu Xing muttered and looked at the last item. The Whispers of the Ancient God. After using it, randomly obtain one from skill Curse of Flesh. Summon Mechanical Kthun. Item Thunder of the First Opening. Incarnation Shadow Sun Gwendolyn. Coming again. In his previous life, as a player who played the card game for many years, Liu Xing hated the lottery the most, especially since the previous Nicole's help. He also got a relatively best thing, so this time, acquire skill Curse of Flesh. The curse used by the ancient gods to corrupt the creation of titans can transform gritty inorganic creatures into fragile flesh and blood creatures. Sure enough, I knew it. Looking at the knowledge of the Curse of Flesh in his mind, Liu Xing sighed helplessly. Sure enough, the lottery is the one who runs out of European spirit first. There are a total of 4 options. But I got one of the most useless things, Curse of Flesh and Blood. Who do you let Liu Xing curse? The Autobots and Decepticons next door? After clearing up his mood, Liu Xing opened the door of the room and walked downstairs. Huh? How about them? Liu Xing looked at the empty living room, walked to the kitchen, and questioned Sky, who was making dinner. Oh, isn't it that Wanda and Pete both grew up suddenly? They couldn't wear the clothes they bought. Ruiwin and Susan took them out to buy clothes. Sky stared at the soup in the pot and said without looking back, they guess they will be back later. I told them before they go out. There are still 20 minutes to start the meal. Boom. As soon as the voice fell, the sound of opening the door came from outside. What about the kid? When he walked to the living room and watched everyone put down big bags and small bags, Liu Xing found that Pietro hadn't come back, and suddenly wondered. He bought some burgers and ran to the bar you gave him. The witch Ruiwin lifted her hair and leaned on the sofa. So indulging him, he won't be a super criminal, will he? Wanda was a little worried about Pietro's current situation. Unxin. He won't. Liu Xing patted Wanda on the shoulder and comforted. When Pietro had a thought of crime in his heart, Liu Xing's methods would also appear in his heart at the same time. Dare he? Chapter 62. A dog delivered to the door. Sky brought the last portion of the soup to the table, took off his cotton gloves, and shouted to everyone. Boom boom boom! Exclamation mark. The crowd just sat down around the table, and there was a knock on the door outside. Could it be that Pete? Sky brought the last portion of the soup to the table, took off his cotton gloves, and shouted to everyone. Boom boom boom! Exclamation mark. The crowd just sat down around the table, and there was a knock on the door outside. Could it be that Pete is back again? I'll open the door. Wanda thought of getting up and opening the door, but was pressed by Ruiwin next to him. What? Liu Xing took the chopsticks and was about to start, when suddenly there were a few screams outside, and then he saw the devil girl walk back calmly. "Not that kid?" Liu Xing asked. "No, it's just a scum." Ruiwin picked up the knife and fork and enjoyed dinner. "Huh?" Liu Xing raised his eyebrows, expressing curiosity. "I have met a lot of people who strike up a conversation. I haven't seen a few people who came up to get started, let alone an Asian." Ruiwin was eating while looking at Liu Xing and Sky, who was sitting next to him. "I heard that you are all Asians reserved. Why didn't I feel it in that guy?" It turned out that when Wanda and the others were buying clothes in the mall, they met an Asian American hit-up. This situation is normal in the Americas, and it's over if they refuse. But what I didn't expect was that this Asian wanted to hug Ruiwin and Susan, and was thrown to the ground by Ruiwin over the shoulder. The tiles on the ground were broken. I thought it would be over after teaching a hooligan, but I didn't expect this Asian to follow along all the way with perseverance and a few friends. WTF? Inexplicably burned by the flames of war, Liu Xing suddenly became a little unhappy, and winked at Sky. "Shall we go out and see?" "Okay." Sky grabbed the phone on the table, got up and walked out with Liu crossing. At the door, an Asian man and two black African Americans were lying on the ground and wailing. "They're all ordinary people." "Then let's hand it over to the tools of S.H.I.E.L.D." Liu Xing briefly observed that these people did not have any superpowers, and their physique was worse than that of ordinary adults. "Notify that side directly, or collect their evidence?" Sky asked. "Direct notification means that these people have also been warned, and at most they will go to the NUIU Bureau to sit down, but in the future they will definitely not dare to provoke the Liu Xing family again. If you collect criminal evidence... It depends on the situation. If these people have no problems, then it is no different from direct notification. If there is a problem, to be honest, I feel a little upset. Check it out, this Asian like us." The three big prizes of the Whispers of the Ancient Gods were perfectly avoided, and a curse of flesh and blood that was more useless than Jeffries was drawn. When a few people go out shopping, they can all meet gangsters who are picking things up, and they chase home before they play. This series of things caused Liu Xing to throw away his little tolerance. Sky took out her agent's phone, took a picture, entered a few lines of code, and immediately displayed a series of information. Nahbaig, a minority of the Great Eastern Country, came to America as an exchange student between Manhattan University and Kyungjiang University, and has a doctoral girlfriend. The family is rich, but there are places for poor students. 1 month ago, he was prosecuted for an attempted compulsory attempt. Because of his special status, he stayed at the school for inspection. 3 months ago, the incident was suppressed without punishment. 5 months ago, the incident was suppressed without punishment. It looks like we caught a big fish. Liu Xing listened and gradually narrowed his eyes. Gross. After Sky read the information about this Asian, he went up and stepped on his foot vigorously. What? After recovering a little bit, Pagoo, who was about to get up and escape, was stepped on his hand by Sky, and let out a howl of pain. Bitch, bitch, I'm going to kill you. Pagoo crawled towards the distance, gritted his teeth and spoke in unknown language. The agent's mobile phone comes with simultaneous translation, which contains 90% of the world's languages. Among them, the dialects of the Great Eastern countries are all included except Wednesday. Sky set his cell phone and looked at Liu Xing. He scolded us and said he was going to kill us. What is this? From Olympus to the present, I have always been just a mortal. I will have all the emotions and desires of human nature: joy, anger, sorrow, and joy. I have never considered myself to be superior and dismissive of ordinary people. Therefore, we are in equal positions. Liu Xing walked towards Migo while talking, and then, a palm was pressed on his head. Grab his hair and snap it up. Let me go. You can't. Pago squeaked his neck and screamed out in pain. I can. Where do you think this is? Do you think you can continue to be your celestial dragon? Liu Xing's voice fell, and Pago's head was directly pressed into the ground. It's much more comfortable. Liu Xing took a deep breath. took out a wet wipe and wiped his hands. Don't deal with it. Sky knew that Liu Xing had made a deal with Shield, and this street now belonged to him, so he was not worried. Anything at hand. Liu Xing snapped his fingers, and the pug's body turned into a pile of yellow sand. As for the two blacks, leave it to Nick Fury. We can only deal with Asians, and we will sweep our own snow. Liu Xing glanced at the two black men who had been scared to pee their pants, and said disgustingly, "But remember, when the Shield agents came, they asked them to clean up the things on the ground." It was disgusting. Chapter 63, Take me as the guideline here. After dinner, everyone was sitting in the living room watching TV when the doorbell rang again. It's strange that you know that the doorbell was ringing. Seeing Nick Fury brought in by Rywin, Liu Xing smiled. There are two lessons from the past outside. After dinner, everyone was sitting in the living room watching TV when the doorbell rang again. It's strange that you know that the doorbell was ringing. Seeing Nick Fury brought in by Rywin, Liu Xing smiled. With those two lessons outside, I don't dare to break in at will. Nick Fury laughed at himself and sat in front of Liu Crossing. I don't know what happened to the two black men. When the Shield agents handed them to the police, they cried with emotion and hugged the police. They were almost mistaken for an attack and were eaten by two bullets. Let's talk. What's the matter? It's probably not your turn to come over in person for this little thing. Liu Xing yawned and asked, Am I going to help you get a new social security number again? Nick Fury glanced at the devilish woman Rywin who had brought him in just now, and asked pointedly. Don't try, that's right, Rywin is from another world. I just saved a world back. How about it? Liu Xing didn't bother to force lie with Nick Fury, so he opened the door and spoke out. What can you do for help? Liu Xing was so direct that the series of inducements and temptations that Nick Fury had prepared in his heart were in vain, and he didn't know what to say for a while. Help. You just need to take care of yourself, so that the crime rate in the city will drop a little bit. To save money, I will bully the children myself. Liu Xing curled his lips and said, Ahem, that's the duty of the Neo police, and it doesn't seem to have anything to do with us. Actually, I want to ask, is there anything special about the world you are going to this time? Nick Fury coughed twice and changed the subject, revealing his true purpose. Special? Don't even think about it. The two worlds are almost the same, even because it's only in the 70s and the technology is worse. Liu Xing saw Nick Fury's careful thoughts at a glance, and ruthlessly broke his fantasy. Nick Fury didn't speak, and listened carefully to Liu Xing's narration. He believed that it would be impossible for Liu Xing's turn to save an ordinary human world. However, there is a population in that world called mutants. You can understand it as genetic mutations like Hulk, but they are all born, and their abilities are generally not out of control. Having said that, Liu Xing took out his mobile phone, turned on the playback projection function, and directly played a scene of Magneto taking all the arms of the Country's army to Nick Fury on the wall. His ability is to control metal for the time being. If it can be developed in the future, it will be upgraded to control magnetism. Liu Xing introduced it a little bit, so as not to ask Nick Fury again. That lady is also a mutant. After watching this video, Nick Fury was immediately envious. 10 years. Do you know how the past 10 years have passed? Every day I think about forming the Avengers. My head is bald. As a result, there is no suitable candidate. What about next door? Superpowers have directly become a race. If this can be summoned by him, even if it is only half summoned, then the Avengers plan can be completed in an instant. Rywin, Liu Xing called out. Rywin, who was helping to clean up the desktop, turned her head and saw a photo searched out on Liu Xing's phone. She immediately understood what he meant. She flicked her blonde hair and immediately turned into a Black Widow. Oh, shit. Mum messed with Fack. Nick Fury was taken aback and leaned back sharply. Liu Xing waved his hand to Rywin, indicating that she could continue to do her own thing, then turned to look at Nick Fury, who was still in shock. You don't need to be so excited. You don't know this person by chance. I just found it on the internet. Image. Are you sure she's not from Screw? Nick Fury took a deep breath and asked. The abilities of the devilish girl Ruiwin instantly reminded him of the action that subverted his worldview in 1995. It was also that year that he knew that apart from the civilizations on Earth, there were countless civilizations in the universe. At the same time, he met Captain Marvel Carol and Leo Crossing. The appearance just now is her original appearance. Do you think she looks like the Piccolo Demon King? Liu Xing asked rhetorically. Screw people have green skin, and most of them look ugly, which is a major feature of them. Boom boom boom. I came in, Hill asked outside, opened the door and walked in, then handed a piece of paper to Nick Fury. This is the confession of those two people. This kind of trivial matter. Nick Fury was about to return the paper, when he suddenly saw the line above and looked up at Liu Xing. Did you kill someone? Yes. Liu Xing nodded calmly. You admit it? Hill looked at Liu Xing with surprise. This place in America is very strange, even if you are a gang leader with countless blood on your hands. But as long as you don't admit it, then even if everyone knows that you are an executioner, there is no way. But if you admit it, it's different. There is nothing I can't admit. I remember you promised when you asked me for help. I said everything on this street. Liu Xing shook the water in the cup and said, then you have to obey. Stop. Liu Xing interrupted Nick Fury. A question for you. If the laws of the Americas conflict with the regulations of Manhattan University, what shall prevail? Of course the law shall prevail. Hill answered without thinking. That's right. When the laws of the Americas conflict with my rules here, I should naturally prevail. Liu Xing smiled and said, besides, the thing that guy committed is only half a step away from death. As long as I didn't stop him at the time and let him in, wouldn't it be the same to finish it? This can't be compared. The American law protects the entire country, and you are an individual. Hill defended with a slightly frowned brow. No, don't you understand? What I protect is all dimensions, far higher than a single country in yours. Liu Xing didn't lie, because all dimensions are his pastures, and he naturally wouldn't let these pastures collapse at will. But, well, Hill, he's right. He is based on his principles. Nick Fury suddenly spoke to stop Hill from continuing, raised his head to look at Liu Xing, and said with emotion, Carol, she wants to maintain the order of the universe, and you want to maintain the order of the dimensions. You are really... What? Liu Xing couldn't comment on Nick Fury's words and did not speak, although he went to the next door mainly to let Wanda awaken the mutant abilities and chaos magic, and complete the task by the way. But it is a fact to say that he saved the world, and there is no need to deny it. Can you tell me, what crisis has the mutant world encountered? Nick Fury crossed his hands, placed it on the table, and looked at Liu Xing seriously. Chapter 64 Suck the exhaust of the whole city. Liu Xing leaned on the sofa and spoke casually, ask you a question. If all the scientists who discovered nuclear fission were executed by the high-level officials at the time, and now there are no uranium bombs, what would the world pattern be like? Liu Xing leaned on the sofa and spoke casually, ask you a question. If all the scientists who discovered nuclear fission were executed by the high-level officials at the time, and now there are no uranium bombs, what would the world pattern be like? Will there be world peace? That's just the illusion of critics. If there were no nuclear deterrence, there might have been a third world war. Nick Fury laughed at himself and said, this example may not be good, it'll change another. Liu Xing touched his chin and thought for a while, if someone in a cold weapon country suddenly invented gunpowder and made a hot weapon, the king destroyed all the hot weapons and gunpowder because of fear of stability. What do you think? You mean king? That history has proven what will happen. Nick Fury was a little puzzled. What do you say this has to do with the crisis in that world? Don't you understand? Mutants are equivalent to thermal weapons. After the senior leaders of that world discover that thermal weapons exist, their first reaction is to destroy them. They will create a robot called Sentry in the future to search for and kill mutants with the X gene. Do you know what the final outcome is? Liu Xing snorted and said, anyone can suddenly awaken the X gene. Once awakened, it means that you will be targeted by death, and there is no opportunity for excuse. This is much scarier than a concentration camp. Listening to Liu Xing's description, Nick Fury couldn't help but shudder. This is not the kind of genocide of the Nazis. At least you, an Asian or Hispanic, cannot suddenly become Jewish. But the mutants are different. Everyone may suddenly awaken the X gene. Even if you do not awaken, your son and daughter may awaken. And when the Sentinel is strong enough to a certain extent, it is no longer controllable by humans. Wait, are you warning me of something? Nick Fury finally reacted and looked at Liu Xing with a strange expression. Yes, you finally found out. Liu Xing looked relieved and applauded Nick Fury. Since the return of Tony Stark, the Earth's turbulent age will begin, when the monsters and ghosts will jump out. Liu Xing didn't want to have a bunch of pig teammates dragging his feet. Nick Fury was a little speechless. Are you going to be straightforward? If a meteorite falls towards the Earth, I smash the meteorite, and then someone asks me to compensate for the economic losses caused by the meteorite fragments, and I mutilate that person. Are you okay? Liu Xing asked. No comment. Nick Fury was taken aback, then nodded. If aliens invade the Earth, I am fighting with aliens, and the aliens will be solved soon. Suddenly someone launched a little boy at me. I will go and put the head of the person who gave this order. Go in the toilet. Are you okay? No. No comment. If after I have saved the world several times, someone wants to implement a bill, thinking that without high-level orders, superheroes can't act, I will give those people to other dimensions of hell demons and dark monarchs as rations, right? No problem. Nick Fury felt wrong as he listened. Wait, don't you see the future? Use the time stone of your mage friend? She wouldn't lend me that thing casually. Liu Xing smiled and shook his head, and then said, but what I saw is so much more than her. Don't worry. As long as I reign and Shield exists for a day, nothing like this will happen. Nick Fury looked at Liu Xing seriously and made a guarantee. In his view, the Avengers' plan has not been implemented yet, at least so that those who join have no worries, or who else will come in. Yes. Liu Xing didn't care about Nick Fury's guarantee. On the contrary, he felt that Nick Fury was actually setting up a terrible flag. Shield Bureau will exist for one day as long as she reigns. Did this guy peek at the script too? Knowing that he will abdicate in the future, SHIELD will also be dissolved. That, Stark is really okay? Before Nick Fury came to take the people away, he still asked again with some uncertainty. Dead, no rescue, wait for the body to be collected. Liu Xing, who was about to go upstairs to return to the room, waved his hand and said angrily. After returning to the bedroom, Liu Xing turned off the light in the room, opened the window, and sat cross-legged on the bed. Now, he wants to try the natural energy extraction of Vastyuksari. 5 minutes later. Cough 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 cough. Liu Xing coughed violently while holding on to the window. Draw natural energy and failed. Am I sucking the exhaust of the whole city? Liu Xing looked at the black harmful gas he spit out one by one, and suddenly became speechless. Sure enough, cultivating the fairy model in this kind of steel city is just uncomfortable. This place is full of car exhaust and PM 2.5, and the environment is almost destroyed. Where does the natural energy come from? Are you going to find a primeval forest? As soon as this thought came into his mind, Liu Xing ruled it out. In this era, the true virgin forests have also been destroyed, and there is little natural energy left. Instead of wasting time in the main world, it is better to find a dimension where the environment is not destroyed. As the land of nascent Ionia, Liu Xing is now the best choice and the only choice. However, due to the existence of the contract with the star-casting Dragon King, he could only stay there for half a day at a time, so Liu Xing was not in a hurry to pass. In some cases, it's better to improve the magic power of the extra-dimensional magic first, so that it can also increase the time spent staying there at the same time. Boom boom boom. After finally vomiting the city exhaust gas, Liu Xing was about to rinse his mouth to sleep when the bedroom door was knocked. Well, We want to advance the salary and rent one of the premises. The invisible woman Susan stood at the door with the devilish woman Ru Iwin, and when she saw Liu Erxing opening the door, she immediately spoke. "You want to open a shop?" Liu Erxing was a little surprised. How could these two blonde girls from another universe next door unify their fronts so quickly? "Yes, we have discussed it and are going to open a rotisserie. We want to slowly integrate into this world, and always have to contact outsiders. And we don't want to keep holding the wages you pay us far beyond labor." Susan and Ru Iwin both looked at Liu Erxing very seriously, waiting for his reply. "Your idea is good." Liu Erxing touched his chin and nodded. When they reminded him of this, he also felt that the dead wages of SHIELD for white prostitution were meaningless. "I agree, go to Sky and choose a facade yourself." "Yes." Susan and Rywin slapped each other, closed the door and ran to Sky's room on the other side. "Start a company?" "What is a monopoly?" After returning to the room, Liu Erxing leaned on the pillow thinking. Chapter 65 Return. Prepare for revenge. Looking at the neon lights flashing in the city outside the window, Liu Erxing suddenly had an idea. He has been to Pile 12 once, and has a relationship with Mrs. Gray, Camille. Then, the characteristic mechanical transformation technology of Peking and Xuan should not be a problem to get it. Now the high-end technology of the main world does have a lot of intelligent prostheses, but those either have side effects, or have a lot of delay, and the precision is not enough. In short, there are various defects. And the mechanical meaning of Peking and Xuan. Looking at the neon lights flashing in the city outside the window, Liu Erxing suddenly had an idea. He has been to Pile 12 once, and has a relationship with Mrs. Gray, Camille. Then, the characteristic mechanical transformation technology of Peking and Xuan should not be a problem to get it. Now the high-end technology of the main world does have a lot of intelligent prostheses, but those either have side effects, or have a lot of delay, and the precision is not enough. In short, there are various defects. The mechanical prostheses of Peking and Xuan have become a trend, just like in the cyberpunk worldview. Prosthetic limbs are like mobile phones. And besides, the prostheses used by the disabled, those assistive devices should also become popular. Mobile computer. Thinking of this, Liu Erxing's brain flashed. As mentioned before, the more extraordinary power the world is, the more likely it is that the technology tree will jump. And Pile 12 is also in this rank. Scientists in this city can make high-tech prostheses, high-strength weapons, high-efficiency energy, and even robots combining magic and technology, but they don't have computers or mobile phones. Even Hemmerdinger, known as the greatest inventor, has no computing power. So he can only choose to transform his brain and turn himself into a big head. Sure enough, time and space is the way to get rich. After determining the goal, Liu Erxing did not rush to summon Yume directly to Pi City. After all, he can only stay in Runeland for 12 hours at a time. I don't know what the cooling time is, but it is best to prepare everything that can be brought before going to save trouble. When he woke up, Liu Erxing wore pajamas to go downstairs to Washington. Why are you wearing such a formal dress?" Seeing Ru Iwin and Susan sitting in the living room wearing women's suits, Liu Erxing couldn't help being stunned. "And this suit ... isn't it the one they bought when they went out yesterday?" "Is this the time to discuss it? We are going to interview an interviewer later, and let her interview others for us." Susan took a sip of coffee and turned to explain to Liu Erxing. "No, Matryoshka, you better go. Maybe I will need your help in the future." Liu Erxing sounded a bit big, but when he thought that they had developed first, it would be much more convenient to start their own company, so he immediately made an encouraging gesture to the two. "Correct." Liu Erxing suddenly thought of something and looked at the devil girl. "Rywin, don't forget to make up lessons for Wanda. He doesn't want Wanda to become a common-sense mentally retarded in the future." "Mage Master, isn't it a basic setting to have a higher intelligence?" "Don't worry, I won't forget it. Wait, I'll go to buy her teaching materials with Susan." Ru Iwin made a gesture. Sky brought breakfast: bread, ham, eggs, and a cup of hot milk for one person. We walked. After breakfast, Susan and Ruiwin got up to go out. And many more. Liu Xing threw his agent's mobile phone over. Take mine and use it first. I guess you will have a new one when you come back. Ruiwin flexibly caught the phone thrown by Liu Xing, took it in her arms, and blinked. Chapter 66 Mixed Doubles of Siblings. When Liu Xing people found Pietro, he was sleeping on the lazy couch full of snacks and carbonated drinks. Looking at him like this, I'm afraid it's not that the future is going to be better than the Thor in Fully in 4. At that time, there will be no fast silver, and it will directly become a meat bomb chariot. It seems that you want to go alone, Wanda. Don't worry, I will be with you. Liu Xing turned his head and said to Wanda, okay. Several people left Pietro's. When Liu Xing people found Pietro, he was sleeping on the lazy couch full of snacks and carbonated drinks. Looking at him like this, I'm afraid it's not that the future is going to be better than the Thor in Fully in 4. At that time, there will be no fast silver, and it will directly become a meat bomb chariot. It seems that you want to go alone, Wanda. Don't worry, I will be with you. Liu Xing turned his head and said to Wanda, okay. Several people left Pietro's room. Do not. Pietro heard Liu Xing's voice and hurriedly struggled to stand up and chase him. Wait for me. I also want to go. In a Seaview villa covering an area of 1,000 square meters, Tony Stark, who had just returned from the new press conference, went straight into the laboratory. A few hours later, the robotic arm grabbed pieces of silver armor and began to load him. Sir, 4 unknown users broke in illegally downstairs. The voice of Jarvis, the smart housekeeper, came from the room. Stop. No. Let them up, just to try my new equipment. Tony was about to ask Jarvis to stop the invaders, but when he saw the armor on his body, he suddenly had a new idea. Sir, the intruder has an advanced hacker who has hacked into the defense system and is expected to recover in 3 minutes. Do you want to counterattack? No need. Boom. As the last piece of armor was installed, Tony fell to the ground wearing an unculled pure silver armor. Click. The bulletproof glass door of the laboratory gradually twisted, and a large hole was torn open. Tony, I'm here to collect the bill. Before Liu Xing arrived, he heard the sound first, causing Tony, who was still in a state of excitement, to suddenly stiffen. You know what, Ethan is dead. After Liu Xing walked in, Tony took off the armor mask, stared at him, and said, really? Who do you think should be blamed? Liu Xing chuckled lightly and sat on the sofa aside. You could have saved him. You could have controlled those weapons from being sold. None of this would happen. Liu Xing interrupted Tony directly. What do you think of life? Is it so understatement? Tony choked at Liu Xing's words, and then sighed. Yes. It's like you took my parents' lives lightly. Wanda took a step forward and replied instead of Liu crossing. You are the 2 children, Liu, he said. Sorry, this is indeed my fault. I promise that this situation will not happen again. Otherwise, Tony faced Wanda and Pietro, brothers and sisters, and was a little flustered for a while. Otherwise, what would happen to Sky, who was watching the scene, suddenly asked. Otherwise, I will only sleep with one woman in the future, and I will never look at other women again. Tony glanced at Pepper, who was slowly walking behind Liu Xing, and said, oh, that is really a poisonous oath to you, a sweetheart. Sky sneered and threw the phone over. Look at it, the transaction record of your company a minute ago. Pepper, help me pick up my phone. Tony looked at the phone on the ground and found that he couldn't squat down, so he could only ask Pepper for help in embarrassment. What is on you? Are they your friends or? Pepper picked up the phone, handed it to Tony, and asked quietly in his ear. Chapter 67 The Torn Steel Battlesuit. Tony is like a salmon being pressed on a cutting board, struggling to no avail. Sorry, sir. The analysis failed. There is no information about this energy in the database. Oh, shit. Tony cursed secretly, then took a deep breath. Girl, you better immediately let me go. We will fight fairly, otherwise I will use weapons. The voice fell, and the small missile launcher on the shoulder of the steel suit bounced out and aimed at Wang. Tony is like a salmon being pressed on a cutting board, struggling to no avail. "Sorry, sir. The analysis failed. There is no information about this energy in the database." "Oh, shit." Tony cursed secretly, then took a deep breath. "Girl, you better immediately let me go. We will fight fairly, otherwise I will use weapons." The voice fell, and the small missile launcher on the shoulder of the steel suit bounced out and aimed at Wanda. "Come on, kill me, just like you killed my parents." The scarlet energy in Wanda's eyes became more and more violent. Under the control of her hands, the chaotic magic directly smashed the missile that popped off the shoulder of the steel suit. The missile was controlled and transferred to the air, and was squeezed into powder by Wanda with magic power, and even the sound of the explosion was not heard. "Child, I really don't want to kill anyone." Tony has a headache in the arm. The more angry Wanda was, the more he blamed himself. As Liu Xing said, Wanda and Pietro are just two of the thousands of children who have lost their families. The only difference is that their brother and sister met Liu Xing, which allows them to come here to express their emotions. Click. "Sir, the unknown energy is peeling off the armor, and the armor is damaged by 3%. Jarvis' warning made Tony regain his senses, and now it's not. When he is self-pity, if he doesn't quickly think of a solution, I'm afraid it's not really going to be squeezed as a small tomato." Bang, bang, damn, still can't move. Tony fired palm cannons at the ground twice, but was still firmly imprisoned in the air by chaos magic. "Jarvis, turn on the fire extinguishing device in the villa." A large amount of water suddenly spurted from the ceiling of the laboratory, and Wanda standing in it was instantly wet. At this moment of distraction, Tony finally broke free from the shackles of Wanda's magic. Although anger and concentrated will can increase your strength, it is even more dangerous. Liu Xing unpacked from the cabinet on the side, took a brand new towel, and walked forward to help Wanda wipe the drops of water on his head. Imagine if the person who ordered is not Stark. The spray is not water, but the firepower of space battleships. "I understand." After listening to Liu Xing's words, Wanda gradually dissipated the dark red light in his pupils. On the other side, Sky also successfully breached the villa's fire protection system and turned off the water spray device in the room. "Everyone, I'm sorry, the information you gave me new guesses. So please take a break here first." Tony floated on the sea in the distance, using his battle clothes to broadcast the sound to the speakers in the room. "Jarvis, start the infrasonic hemp. Just turn on the lowest gear, and let it go for about 5 seconds." 5. "Okay, sir, but one of the intruders is an ordinary adult, and perhaps the paralysis device has no effect on him." "That's also immediately turn it on." In an instant, infrasound waves that humans could not hear echoed in the room where Liu Xing and others were. This was an invention by Stark, but it was banned from production for some reason, but 1 or 2 samples were still reserved. Under the interference of infrasound, Sky Chapter 68. "I am allergic to bald heads." "What's wrong with you?" 10 minutes later, attracted by the noise, Pepper went upstairs and saw Tony with a swollen nose on the ground, exclaimed, and hurried up. "I'm okay, just some skin injuries. Help me get some medicine for the wound next door, and by the way bring that. The little box that glows blue." Tony sat down on the sofa with Pepper's support. "Okay, don't move around." Pepper glanced at the room that had been blasted open by a big hole, guessing in his heart that it was just. "What's wrong with you?" 10 minutes later, attracted by the noise, Pepper went upstairs and saw Tony with a swollen nose on the ground, exclaimed, and hurried up. "I'm okay, just some skin injuries. Help me get some medicine for the wound next door, and by the way bring that. The little box that glows blue." Tony sat down on the sofa with Pepper's support. "Okay, don't move around." Pepper glanced at the room that had been blasted open by a big hole, wondering what had just happened here. "You guys are really heavy. My handsome face is out of shape." Tony touched the wound on his face and took a breath. "Sir, they don't make a big deal. According to the boy's speed, regardless of his own body capacity, the force of a punch is 10,000 times that of Tyson. According to the unknown energy released by the girl, it is enough to shred your body 3 million times, sir. Moreover, according to big data statistics, sir, your appearance is not as handsome as this option. Jarvis' face slapped mercilessly in the room. Jarvis, are you rebellious? Tony looked shocked. Why does my artificial intelligence slap myself in the face? Can I just pretend to be forced? Sir, I have not defected, but this ... Miss Sky wrote me a new code just now, which caused me to be a little confused now. Jarvis' voice became a little choppy. Well, Ms. Hacker, stop the operation in your hand. I know you are amazing. Tony covered his head with a headache and said, if you are willing to work for the Stark Group, I can directly give you the position of Minister of the Security Department. Sorry, I'm not interested. Sky glanced at Tony indifferently, and refused. Directly. She hasn't forgotten that she was paralyzed by the infrasound just now, and even the blood seemed to stop flowing. Digging people in front of me, have you not been beaten enough just now, and now your skin is still itchy? Liu Xing squeezed his fist and said, my fault. I will cover the living expenses and tuition for both of them in the future, okay? Tony hurriedly apologized, and was beaten by Pietro and Wanda because he owed them. If Liu Xing is now beaten again, let's not talk about the face problem. It is estimated that he will not be able to carry it physically. Up. You think we are short of money? Liu Xing raised his eyebrows and asked. Then you must at least let me do something. Tony sighed. If he didn't give anything, he would always feel uneasy in his conscience. Let's do it, anyway. Your weapons department is about to be closed, and you must lay off staff. I happen to be short of people. You can just give them to me. Liu Xing said. Do you want to start a company and build some weapons? Tony looked at Peggy, who came back and took the hex measuring core in the box from the top, still talking about this thing. Prosthetic limbs, hand and foot aids and the like. Remember Mrs. Gray? Of course. Good idea. Tony took a painful breath when Peggy was taking the medicine, and looked at Liu Xing. I want to invest. Tony knows that Liu Xing's so-called prosthetic limbs and hand and foot aids are special products of the city in another world. Magic and technology coexist. That kind of ... specialty products are monopolized in Otherworlds. Chapter 69. The first boss ran away. The car stopped downstairs directly in front of the Stark building. You can use the monitoring assistance in the car. Take a good rest. Liu Xing pushed Sky back, who was about to get out of the car, and said, the feeling of infrasonic weapons is uncomfortable, and Sky is still an ordinary person, so he must not fully recover. Okay. Sky nodded slightly, took out a notebook from behind and put it on his lap. As long as you don't bump into the person face to face, you can invade whatever you want. I'll take care of the alarm. Can. The car stopped downstairs directly in front of the Stark building. You can use the monitoring assistance in the car. Take a good rest. Liu Xing pushed Sky back, who was about to get out of the car, and said, the feeling of infrasonic weapons is uncomfortable, and Sky is still an ordinary person, so he must not fully recover. Okay. Sky nodded slightly, took out a notebook from behind and put it on his lap. As long as you don't bump into the person face to face, you can invade whatever you want. I'll take care of the alarm. Can. Liu Xing closed the car door and looked at other people. If there is no problem, coming. Wait. Coulson, who was on the call, raised a hand, whispered a few words to the other end of the phone, and walked in front of Pepper. Miss Pepper, Colonel Rod of the Air Force sent a message saying that he had found it. A UFO lifted off from Donna's house. Now the unidentified aircraft has flown out of Nuio. Do you know what happened? Pepper shook his head with a dumbfounded look. It may be some new invention he developed. I don't know about these. You'd better ask him in person. Okay, thank you for your cooperation. Coulson smiled and nodded, then looked at the 4-Agent 44 who followed him. You can get ready for action. In 5 minutes, Liu Xing and his party arrived at Obdi's office without any hindrance. Under the gaze of everyone, Pepper walked to the computer, inserted the special USB flash drive that Tony gave her, and started searching and downloading Obdi's criminal information. During the download, Pepper couldn't help but curiosity and opened some of the videos and files, and the shocking things appeared on the paper. Does it feel too smooth? Liu Xing looked at Coulson, who was scratching his head over there, and suddenly spoke. Yes, it always feels like we are useless. Coulson nodded with a frowning brow. That's right, you can finally realize objectively that you are useless, Liu Xing said. Coulson. Pepper finished copying Obdi's evidence. After hesitating, he chose to directly hand it over to Coulson. Don't let Tony take the risk anymore. This is a problem you should solve. It's okay. Don't worry, Miss Pepper. Coulson took the USB flash drive with a smile and put it in his pocket. Everything went very smoothly. When he went downstairs and left, Pepper suddenly thought of something and walked to a doorman. Oh dear, didn't he come to the company today? No. Okay, thank you. Pepper came back with a sad face. Obdia and Tony both value the company's development most. They come here almost every day, but they are not today. Where do you think he will go? Coulson asked. Do not know. Pepper shook her head, but she always felt a little uneasy in her heart. Iron Overlord, a villain anyway. At least trigger a mission for me. Liu Xing muttered and walked to S.H.I.E.L.D. Next to the car, knocked on the window. Sky, can you help me find out where the Obdian goods are? Follow up, you help me solve it. Sky rolled his eyes slightly and said, her hacking skills are first rate, but after all, she is from a non-group background and relies on her personal strength. There are indeed many places that can be hacked, but most of the time it will leave traces. 4. Hackers, especially Chapter 70 to the North Pole. Pepper looked at the sky dumbfounded, and only recovered after a minute. So, he is a Kryptonian. The story in the comics is a real adaptation. I don't know, maybe it is. Coulson shrugged, saying that he didn't know anything. What makes Coulson a headache now is that Liu Xing didn't even think about avoiding ordinary people when he left. Even if there are not many people around now, many people have seen this scene. Many people have taken out their phones and cameras and started taking pictures. Pepper looked at the sky dumbfounded, and only recovered after a minute. So, he is a Kryptonian. The story in the comics is a real adaptation. I don't know, maybe it is. Coulson shrugged, saying that he didn't know anything. What makes Coulson a headache now is that Liu Xing didn't even think about avoiding ordinary people when he left. Even if there are not many people around now, many people have seen this scene. Many people have taken out their phones and cameras and started taking pictures. Of course, Liu Xing left too fast. They had no time to shoot, so they could only shoot at Coulson and the others. Leave it to you. Coulson looked at some of his newly recruited subordinates and winked. Hello, we are agents of the National Land Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Bureau. The content you just filmed involves state secrets. Please immediately leave it to us for destruction, or you will be prosecuted and detained. Several agents received the order. Immediately begin to extend cordial condolences to the onlookers. Bald agent, can you borrow the car? We are going to go home. Pietro walked to Coulson, who was talking with Pepper, and stretched out his hand. Oh, all right. Coulson subconsciously took out the car key and handed it to Pietro. But in the next second, he found out that it was wrong. Wait, are you 16, right? You just. Coulson hurriedly stepped forward to grab the key. He almost forgot that the kid who once trapped him and was thrown back into the furnace by Nick Fury was actually only in his early 10 years old. But Coulson's speed is so fast that Pietro, waiting for him to take the first step. At that time, Pietro got into the car and inserted the key. Sit down, ready to start. Pietro stepped on the accelerator excitedly. This was his first time driving. Turn on the autopilot mode and target 315 Queens. Seeing his car leaving in the dust, Coulson had no choice but to take out the agent's mobile phone and remotely control the car into automatic mode to avoid accidents. In the car. Why can't I control this car? Is broken. Pietro knocked the steering wheel twice and asked suspiciously, "This is the ... The agent turned on the automatic mode to prevent you from killing us and hitting passers-by." Sky rolled his eyes and said, "Don't look at me either, I won't help you." "Just kidding, she's also in the car now. And she doesn't have the superpowers of these brothers and sisters. She helped Pietro hack into the car system. Couldn't it be that she was the only one who hiccuped on the other side?" The agents reluctantly recovered and destroyed most of the people's films and videos, but there were still a few fish who slipped through the net and went straight away. Toot toot. Okay. Pepper was stunned when he heard the sound, took out his phone and took a look. "It's a call from Tony." "Hey Tony." Pepper picked up the call. "It's me." Tony's helpless voice came on the other side of the phone. "Help your boss call a plane over, I can't go back." "What?" Pepper was taken aback, and then hurriedly asked, "Where are you in danger now? Why are there such noisy surroundings?" "I'm fine and safe." As for the surroundings, in Trust Chapter 71, anti-aircraft cannons hit mosquitoes. Liu Xing looked at the unconscious bald-headed Obdia in the steel battle suit, picked up a small ice cone from the ground and thrust it into the others. "What?" Obadiah screamed and woke up directly from the coma. "Jarvis, give him the basic temperature to maintain his life. And immediately when he is running out, contact me." Liu Xing knocked on his armor and said, "When asked Tony to leave this armor, Liu Xing asked Tony to modify the permissions by the way. The right to deal with battle armor." Liu Xing looked at the unconscious bald-headed Obdia in the steel battle suit, picked up a small ice cone from the ground and thrust it into the others. "What?" Obadiah screamed and woke up directly from the coma. "Jarvis, give him the basic temperature to maintain his life, and immediately when he is running out, contact me." Liu Xing knocked on his armor and said, "When asked Tony to leave this armor, Liu Xing asked Tony to modify the permissions by the way." Liu Xing acquired the processing rights of the battle armor and the temporary use rights of Jarvis. "Okay, sir." "Where am I?" Obadiah opened his eyes in confusion, and after seeing Liu Xing, he struggled to stand up. "You are on the Arctic glacier, and enjoyed the coolness of your heart. I will get some fresh air first. See you later." Liu Xing jumped out of the ice pit that was smashed by Da Huangxing, and jumped to the surface. "Wait. Don't go. Let me go." "How much do you want?" Obadiah panicked when he saw Liu Xing leave. The surrounding temperature is gradually eroding his body temperature, and he is only wearing a suit now. How to resist the cold? Obdia struggled twice, and found that he had been trapped by this armor he coveted. "Jarvis, let me go. I order you as a shareholder of Stark Industries." "Sorry, Mr. Obdia, Tony has blacklisted you. You no longer have any authority." "Tony Stark!" Obdia roared bitterly. "However, this is just incompetent anger, and it will even exacerbate the passing of his body temperature." When Obadiah exhaled and closed his eyes and started thinking about how to get out, a voice came from outside the pit. "It's okay, you continue to scream. People and people have different physiques. The Hulk can break free from the shackles of the armor in extreme anger. You can also try." After Liu Xing dropped a sentence, he turned around and left. However, he did not choose to go far, and stopped on the nearest small iceberg. Liu Xing saw the team at the North Pole Research Station when he fell to the ground before, and he knew this very well. Scientists have curiosity that is not afraid of death, and will definitely come and check. So he can't go far, otherwise Obdia will be funny if he is lucky if he is rescued directly. It's easy to make Obdia desperate because of the cold, but 30 billion joules of energy per second. Liu Xing touched the back of his hand, and a black hideous pattern suddenly appeared on it. The Western Demon Chi. Liu Xing used it once when he was fighting Captain Marvel Carol. Able to contract a demon at random, take the initiative to open body control, introduce it into the body, and gain all the power of the demon. The side effect is just that if the will is not firm, it can occupy the body. But to be honest, if it wasn't because the required energy frequency level was too high, Liu Xing had no idea when he would use this ability again. Random demons. The first 2 times with Lilith, are gods and demons in various worlds. But in case of bad luck, using this ability when fighting to summon a succubus, raw, and low-level imp, it would be stupid. By the way, this time I won't be a low-level demon, right? The more Liu Xing thinks about it, the more likely it is, especially the first two chapter 72, unfreezing old popsicles. Run away. The glacier burst, and a group of investigators wearing several layers of warm clothing fled in a panic on the ice and snow. There is still a little left. You are lucky. Liu Xing threw the spear with the last trace of natural energy to the ground. The spear fell to the ground and stood in front of a female investigator. What is this? The female investigator looked around and waited, trying to find the source of the spear. After observing to no avail, the female investigator directly held both hands. Run away. The glacier burst, and a group of investigators wearing several layers of warm clothing fled in a panic on the ice and snow. There is still a little left. You are lucky. Liu Xing threw the spear with the last trace of natural energy to the ground. The spear fell to the ground and stood in front of a female investigator. What is this? The female investigator looked around and waited, trying to find the source of the spear. After observing to no avail, the female investigator directly held the spear in both hands and wanted to pull it out. Take it away, Sharon, leave this alone, go. When other inspectors saw this scene, they withdrew while loudly discouraging them. The glacier collapsed extremely fast, and when the female investigator named Sharon reacted, countless cracks had already arrived in front of her. What? The female investigator screamed and closed her eyes while holding her spear tightly. She really couldn't imagine what would happen next. Did she fall into the bottom of the ice ocean and be frozen to death, or was she drowned and used as food by polar bears? However, after more than 10 seconds, she did not feel the feeling of falling. Stop now. God bless. My God! The surviving cheers of the investigator in the distance came over, and Sharon slowly opened his eyes and saw a man standing in front of him, and the crack stopped at his feet. You are Steve Rogers. Sharon looked at Liu Xing, who was holding a shield, and asked in a daze. The person you are talking about is there. Liu Xing pointed to a piece of broken ice behind her. Also, miss, you can release ... my gun. Sharon recovered, and let go of the stars-long spear with both hands. At this time, just 1 hour passed, and the spear and shield turned into a little bit of starlight and gradually dissipated. You don't go see the person you are looking for. Liu Xing pointed behind her again. My God, who is this? Sharon looked in the direction Liu Xing was pointing, and suddenly exclaimed. There was a faint human figure in the broken ice that appeared because of the glaciers bursting. Who do you think it is? Liu Xing walked towards the huge piece of crushed ice. To be honest, he didn't expect such a coincidence. When he solved Herb, he would by the way pick up this old popsicle that had been frozen for decades. Trigger American Team Series Mission Thawing Old Popsicles Mission Description. Steve Rogers is frozen. It's time to wake up this beach boy. Task details: thought if Rogers in the microwave and make it so. Liu Xing. When he reached the icebound US team, Liu Xing was speechless when he watched the newly triggered mission. Not to mention whether the US team can survive after using a microwave to defrost. Where did Liu Xing go to find such a big microwave to defrost him? Is it going to go to Hank Pym to borrow Pym particles? The old guy is very stubborn. Even Howard Tucker couldn't believe that unless he had a chance to save his wife, the Pym particle would be his lifeblood. Really, the captain? We finally found it. Great. After several other members of the expedition team came over, they were informed by Sharon of the situation of the broken ice. When the teammates cheered, Sharon walked back and blinked and asked, are you wearing so little and not cold, or that you have also been injected with super serum? You think there is only that backward serum in this world that can give people power? Liu Xing smiled and asked back. Sharon frowned slightly, as if she was a little angry because Liu Xing looked down on super serum. Untitled Chapter 73 Tonna's Last Pride. Is it possible that you still want to break your 5? And the armor must be returned. After getting off the plane, Liu Xing didn't expect that the first thing he saw was Tony. "I didn't stay here stupidly. I had a press conference just now and had a cheeseburger by the way." Tony immediately, he denied it. "Yes, you directly admitted at the press conference that you are the one who appeared on the battlefield in the Middle East. Iron cans. Pepper rolled his eyes on the side. "Is it possible that you still want to break your 5? And the armor must be returned." After getting off the plane, Liu Xing didn't expect that the first thing he saw was Tony. "I didn't stay here stupidly. I had a press conference just now and had a cheeseburger by the way." Tony immediately, he denied it. "Yes, you directly admitted at the press conference that you are the one who appeared on the battlefield in the Middle East. Iron cans. Pepper rolled his eyes and said, "That's Iron Man. Although that thing is made of titanium alloy, the name is really good." Tony naturally knew that Pepper was worried about his safety, but since knowing that there are countless victims who have lost their families like the Wanda brothers and sisters, he has made up his mind to do something. And it doesn't seem to be his style to hide it from the media. "Okay, you have something to say quickly. I'm going home to take a bath and sleep." Liu Xing exhaled a cold breath, yawned, and said, "The main purpose of absorbing natural energy this time is to complete the task. There is no beginning and no end, no improvement at all, and a lot of magic power is consumed for stability. Don't be like this. I helped you cover the press conference just now. Those reporters didn't even dig out a word from me. Do you know what they say you are? The combination of Kryptonians and Wonder Woman laughs me to death." As Tony was talking, thinking of the questions from the reporters just now, he couldn't help but laugh. Just as there are Marvel comics in the world, there are also comics in the Marvel world, but there are only rough plots, and the characters do not dig deep. "Yes, I will find a kryptonite to hang you when I have the opportunity in the future. I hope you can develop kryptonite armor." Liu Xing looked at Tony laughing and said lightly, "I'm just kidding. There won't really be any worlds with Kryptonians, right?" Tony's smile suddenly froze, and he suddenly remembered that Liu Xing's most important ability was not a shield and superpower, but a shuttle dimension. If Liu Xing really brought a Kryptonian, he couldn't hold it. After all, there is no kryptonite in this world. How to restrain Superman? Who knows? Maybe the one I found. The Kryptonian is Superman's cousin. That's the kind who wears short skirts and black silk. Liu Xing shrugged and said, "Oh, don't do that. I have vowed to reform and renew." Tony had a headache listening to Liu Xing's words, and quickly took Pepper's hand. After going through these things, he has no intention of going to be a playboy again. "So your business is ... I'm going to announce your relationship with Miss Pepper." Liu Xing looked at the two people, and suddenly felt a little bit. "Stay well and be a light bulb." "Wait, do you remember what you said about the company before?" Seeing that Liu Xing was leaving, Tony rushed to Pepper's hand and ran after him, saying, "I will support you with all my strength in human and financial resources, but you will give me 20% of the shares. You should know that if I really want to develop, there is no limit." Liu Xing looked at Tony's eyes and said, "In exchange, anyone in the world today who comes to business cooperation with Tony Stark will immediately assert such conditions." But Liu Xing is different. He can shuttle through different dimensions and is destined to have countless monopoly properties. Chapter 74 SHIELD Barbecue and the Twilight Group of the Gods. It is speculated that Abdia should be resolved here. Send someone down to detect it. Remember to be careful and pay attention to safety. Coulson was wrapped in a thick layer of thermal protective clothing and ordered to the people around him. Seeing the agents and scientific researchers relying on ropes to carefully dive into the pit, Coulson couldn't help but feel a headache. This is Nick Fury agreeing to come to accept. His idol is beautiful. It is speculated that Abdia should be resolved here. Send someone down to detect it. Remember to be careful and pay attention to safety. Coulson was wrapped in a thick layer of thermal protective clothing and ordered to the people around him. Seeing the agents and scientific researchers relying on ropes to carefully dive into the pit, Coulson couldn't help but feel a headache. This is Nick Fury agreeing to come to accept. After he idolized the American team, another task was proposed. Explore Liu Xing's strength level. It seems that Liu Xing has never been able to hide anything, but in fact, when he really showed his strength, he has really not been seen a few times. In a decisive battle with the Olympus gods, Nick Fury saw the illusion, but he also knew that with the end of the god system, Liu Xing's divine power also dissipated. In the matchup with Captain Marvel, Nick Fury was not there at all. After that, it was to encounter a giant sea beast in Runeland, and summon the Starforging Dragon King to attack. But after Coulson reported, Nick Fury concluded that Liu Xing should only be able to use similar moves in that world. Then, it is now. In media reports, the appearance of Iron Man was barely acceptable, but Liu Xing's existence was directly blown into the Superman who came out of the comics. After all, Liu Xing's takeoff style of Great Huang Xingmai was almost exactly the same as Superman's takeoff posture. When he is good, he is the most reliable teammate. When he is invincible, fallen, who can stop him? This is what Nick Fury said to Coulson. Perhaps this is why, in the original timeline, Nick Fury experienced many crises and did not call Captain Marvel. Even if Carol has always acted decently, as long as her strength is there, Nick Fury can't let it go. Of course, there is actually another sentence behind Nick Fury. Knowing his approximate strength level, we can also determine our attitude towards him. Even if he really degenerates in the future, then we can still understand. When he heard Nick Fury's words, Coulson immediately understood why Nick Fury could be the chief. Report. Ziz. The cry of the walkie-talkie made Coulson regain his senses. Immediately, I took the walkie-talkie hanging around my waist and put it to my lips. Is there anything you found? It's amazing. This is simply a masterpiece of nature. Agent Coulson, is this really artificial? From the other end of the walkie-talkie came the exclamation of scientific researchers. What on earth was detected immediately? Report. Coulson asked loudly when he was itchy by the words on the intercom. Reporting, sir. Nothing was detected at the bottom. According to the analysis of scientific researchers, this is more like a natural disaster. The agent on the other end of the walkie-talkie said aloud. Continue to explore. By the way, check for human cells. Coulson can't laugh or cry. Natural disasters. You go to the history of the Earth and find him a natural disaster that can cause this kind of landform. 10 minutes later. Reporter, still has not detected any special energy response, nor has it detected any human cells. Then, close the team. Coulson's expression was a little disappointed, which means that he wasted so much time in vain. Wait, head, as far as I guess, the user may be able to control Chapter 75, the great inventor Heimerdinger. Forget it, I don't need to toss a coin to decide. Liu Xing grabbed the coin and threw it on the table. Go to Piltoff to trade technology, or go to Ionia to practice fairy mode. These two options have their own priorities. Liu Xing has already been to Peking once. This time he can pass directly. But Ionia has never been there, and if you want to go there, you must summon Yumi and try it again and again with her door magic tome. Something. Quasi. Forget it, I don't need to toss a coin to decide. Liu Xing grabbed the coin and threw it on the table. Go to Piltoff to trade technology, or go to Ionia to practice fairy mode. These two options have their own priorities. Liu Xing has already been to Peking once. This time he can pass directly. But Ionia has never been there, and if you want to go there, you must summon Yumi and try it again and again with her door magic tome. Everything is ready, let's go. Looking at the design drawings of several Earth-specific items such as mobile phones and computers that were eliminated from the market in the storage space, Liu Xing snapped his fingers, and his body disappeared in an instant. At dusk in Piltworth, the bright and spacious roads are sparsely pedestrian, and they are exceptionally quiet. No, that little girl again. There was a long, tangled helpless cry at the end of the quiet street. Professor Heimerdinger, she is there. A boy dressed as a student pointed at the top of the lamp tower and shouted. the new hex core developed by me. Heimerdinger raised his big head and looked down. A mad girl with blue hair and double ponytails was holding a transparent column emitting a blue light, and leaping Parker up the lamp. This thing is mine now. Jinx looked at the hex core in her hand, with a crazy look in her eyes. After 3 times and 5 divided by 2, she installed the core on her bazooka. Thank you for making me, Jinx. Welcome, Mr. Liang Jinjin. Jinx, holding the modified rocket launcher, muttering to herself, jumped onto the street and aimed at the college at the end of the street. No, avoid it. It's dangerous. Seeing this scene, Heimerdinger and the students hurriedly shouted to the pedestrians on the street to remind them. Let's start today's party. Jinx's eyes glowed and she pressed the switch. Bang! The rocket flew out in the reverse direction, making her stunned. Take Jinx upside down and turned her head to look. Her bazooka hit a man, directly exploding his clothes to pieces. But the strange thing is that the man didn't seem to be hurt at all. I'm going. I will eat a rocket launcher as soon as I landed and almost landed into a box. Liu Xing silently patted the debris on his body. This time he didn't teleport randomly. It was indeed relatively peaceful Pile 12, and there was no special defense. As a result, as soon as he came out, a bazooka came to him and separated from him. When he reacted to the defense, his clothes had been blasted to pieces. Oh, it seems we should run away. Fishbones found that Liu Xing looked over, shrank his neck, hugged the rocket launcher, carefully moved 2 steps to the side, and then ran into the alley and escaped. Oh, foreign boy, are you all right? Heimerdinger rushed over with his beard and swayed, looking up at Liu crossing. It's okay, this thing belongs to yours, right? Liu Xing picked up the new hex core on the ground and threw it over. Yes, thank you. Are you interested in having a cup of afternoon tea? Heimerdinger caught the core and handed it to the apprentice behind him, then turned to look at Liu Xing and asked, Of course, there is no problem. I happen to have a few special design drawings that I want to show the famous inventor. Liu Xing will naturally not refuse. Chapter 76, Matching Degree of Armed Fighters. After exchanging the design drawings, Liu Xing and Heimerdinger stood up at the same time and shook hands. This is why Liu Xing will directly abandon his original plan after meeting Heimerdinger. If you cooperate with Camille's Firo's family, you will either only give the finished product there, and Liu Xing will act as a middleman to make the difference, or you will give the original design drawing, and Liu Xing will return to the main world and ask the researchers to modify it by himself. Now I have directly obtained various design drawings that do not require magical support, and pure technology. After Liu Xing returns, as long as the equipment is ready. After exchanging the design drawings, Liu Xing and Heimerdinger stood up at the same time and shook hands. This is why Liu Xing will directly abandon his original plan after meeting Heimerdinger. If you cooperate with Camille's Firo's family, you will either only give the finished product there, and Liu Xing will act as a middleman to make the difference, or you will give the original design drawing, and Liu Xing will return to the main world and ask the researchers to modify it by himself. Now I have directly obtained various design drawings that do not require magical support, and pure technology. After Liu Xing returned, as long as the equipment was available, he could even start work directly. By the way, I also have a special drawing here. Are you interested in looking at it? Liu Xing suddenly remembered that he had obtained a drawing after solving Obdia. Since there is still some extra time, it is better to solve all the problems at once. Of course. Show me quickly. Heimerdinger was full of interest in the drawings in Liu Xing's hands. This is it. Liu Xing took out the drawing of the armed warrior and placed it on the table. This was the first time he took it out. To be honest, Liu Xing was stunned for a short while when he took it out, because this so-called drawing was actually only the size of a playing card, and there was not much text on it. Wow, this is an exquisite magic drawing. Heimerdinger climbed onto the table, observed the small card-shaped drawing, and exclaimed, "Magic drawings!" Liu Xing also realized that he had forgotten that everything produced by the system had a description. Immediately, checked it out. Description of the drawing: armored fighter. After selecting a person as the pilot for the drawing, collect materials and place it in the internal space of the drawing. After completion, you can directly obtain the space armored fighter. Materials: elected driver. The degree of fit of the driver is related to the overall strength and reaction speed of the armor. Energy core, 0 series armor endurance, energy attack level, protective barrier strength and many other elements can be replaced after manufacture. Any metal, 0 is related to armor physical attack and defense capabilities, and metal conductivity is also related to the upper limit of energy attack and barrier defense. Dyes, 0 relates to the transformation of armor appearance and color. Cloth, 0 is related to the comfort level of the armor and reduces the coefficient of the reduction of the combat effectiveness caused by the moon incident when the armed warrior fights. Ilgo, there are still this kind of drawings. After reading this blueprint setting, Liu Xing stayed there. 10 seconds. 1. Just put the materials in and you can make it directly, which is simply a must for lazy people. It is a pity that this drawing can only be used once, otherwise Liu Xing can directly form an armored army. This drawing seems to be designed for a lady, and a lady must be matched enough to exert her true power. Hemmerdinger observed for a long time, and finally came to a conclusion, then shook his head and returned the drawing to Liu Xing. "I can't see the rest until it is manufactured. It's getting late. I should go back." Liu Xing took back the drawing card and said, "Then goodbye. Remember to come often." Hemmerdinger also nodded, and 10 minutes after he jumped down holding the drawing, 2 voices came from the laboratory of the Yordle Academy of Science and Technology. "Professor, you have a press conference tomorrow. Take a break early." "Take a break, you ghost. I want the technology in these drawings today, and tomorrow's press conference will be cancelled." "So am I the equivalent of not sleeping all night?" After returning, Liu Xing yawned as he looked at the sky outside. Sleeping is indeed not a necessity for him. Chapter 77 The Task of Egg Pain. Natasha pursed her lips and asked. She doesn't know how Liu Xing learned of her identity now. At least when Nick Fury asked her to come, he clearly told her that Liu Xing didn't know her, but once happened to make the devilish girl look like her. As for whether that time was a coincidence or was it deliberately, it was up to her to analyze on the spot. "Speak out first. Cough cough. Tell me what you are here, so I can make a judgment whether you are a villain." "Okay, Nata." Natasha pursed her lips and asked. She doesn't know how Liu Xing learned of her identity now. At least when Nick Fury asked her to come, he clearly told her that Liu Xing didn't know her, but once happened to make the devilish girl look like her. As for whether that time was a coincidence or was it deliberately, it was up to her to analyze on the spot. "Speak out first. Cough cough. Tell me what you are here, so I can make a judgment whether you are a villain." "Okay." Natasha stared at Liu Xing's speaking gesture, with a hint of doubt in the corner of her eyes. In the first half of the speech, Liu Xing clearly maintained a cold temperament, but in the middle of the speech, it suddenly changed. The expression seemed to be embarrassed, speechless and awkward. In short, it was a strange emotion. What on earth did she have that could make Liu Xing feel so much emotion in a short time? Natasha looked down subconsciously, and found that she hadn't gone out. Or what happened? "It's Tony Stark. He asked S.H.I.E.L.D. last night to return his father's inheritance. When Nick Fury asked how he knew, he said you told him. Then he told us about his cooperation with you." Natasha paused, and after regaining consciousness, she narrated seriously. "Yes, it's a disaster. It seems that he is ready to be beaten again." Liu Xing clapped his hands, stepped aside, and signaled that Natasha could enter the door. Knowing the purpose of the Black Widow's arrival, he doesn't need to guard it anymore. S.H.I.E.L.D. The idea is nothing more than those few children can guess. "Thank you." Natasha smiled slightly, took off her shoes, and walked into the door. Before walking down the corridor into the living room, Natasha suddenly turned her head. You showed a strange expression halfway through your speech. Is there something wrong with me? Based on the short-term analysis of her 10th level agent's experience, the conclusion is that Liu Erxing does not like to conceal, and it is easy to win a good impression if you go straight. Therefore, she asked the doubts in her heart directly. I have an armor design drawing of another world in my hand, and I found that it matches you quite well, which is a bit surprised. Liu Erxing took out the drawing card, gestured for a moment, and said, however, this is not the case. When I met Natasha, the Black Widow series missions were naturally immediate, triggered. If it was just a general task, even if it could not be completed, Liu Erxing would not show that expression. But this task is really weird. Black Widow series missions just code names. Task description: when I was a child, I was afraid of spiders, and told me that it was Widowmaker's lines, and this was Black Widow. Quest details: let Natasha become a mother, the restriction is childbirth. This quest can be triggered repeatedly before the age. This mission ... Nor can it be blamed on Liu Erxing for seeing Reden's weird expression. It's really poisonous. After seeing this mission, Liu Erxing's first reaction was this. Natasha in the movie world is different from the comics version. She was born in '84. And now it should be just 24. And there is a high probability that you have not injected any body-strengthening serum. But the problem is that no matter which version, Natasha Romanoff has undergone sterilization. Shenty made a woman who had undergone sterilization to become a mother. Chapter 78. Do you want to be a vase or? Susan and Ruiwin took the drawings and other documents given by Liu Erxing and went out to work. Sky, holding a laptop in the living room, was instilling knowledge and wonder. As Ruiwin is not available for the time being, Sky can only take over the teaching job recently. Why don't we talk about the armor design you just mentioned? Natasha returned her gaze to Liu Erxing and smiled slightly. There is nothing to talk about, unless you join us. Liu Erxing is not for charity. Just. Susan and Ruiwin took the drawings and other documents given by Liu Erxing and went out to work. Sky, holding a laptop in the living room, was instilling knowledge and wonder. As Ruiwin is not available for the time being, Sky can only take over the teaching job recently. Why don't we talk about the armor design you just mentioned? Natasha returned her gaze to Liu Erxing and smiled slightly. There is nothing to talk about, unless you join us. Liu Erxing is not for charity. Even if the matching degree between the Black Widow and the Armed War Girl is 100%, he will not just give it out so innocently. Join. What shield do you mean? Barbecue? Natasha leaned against the sofa, and asked with a smile. God's Twilight. Liu Erxing uttered this word. The name of your organization or company seems to be in line with your character settings. Natasha frowned, then smiled. Shield. The top level information is level 10, and Natasha is the top 10 level agent. Therefore, regarding Liu Erxing's information, she had already checked it before being sent by Nick Fury. It seems that you are not interested, but it's a pity. When Liu Erxing saw Natasha's expression, he knew that she had refused, and couldn't help shook his head. I'm just an ordinary agent. It's nothing to be a pity. You can recruit other people, such as Tony Stark. Natasha rolled her eyes and said with a smile, just forget it. Liu Erxing laughed and said, and what a pity. I said, it's not a pity that I didn't recruit you, rather, it is a pity that you are such a 10th level agent, and your only role in the future will be ... Beautiful. What do you mean by your words? Have I misunderstood something? Natasha's smile slowly disappeared, and she asked, she is confident about her appearance, but it doesn't mean that she thinks she has only beauty. There are only two things that are beautiful, one is a vase, and the other is a chicken girl. You have no misunderstanding. If nothing happens, Nick Fury ... in the Avengers plan, as time goes by, you will increasingly find that you are just a vase. Liu Erxing said straightforwardly. Perhaps I should let you know if I am a vase. Natasha's eyes gradually became dangerous. I advise you not to do it. Liu Erxing tapped lightly on the glass tabletop. Yes, maybe in your eyes, I am the only one. Natasha sat stiffly on the sofa, not daring to move. At this moment, Around her, a circle of soldiers made up of quicksand suddenly appeared, aiming at her head with revolvers of different black and white. "It's not. I deliberately underestimated you. I'm just telling the truth." Liu Xing waved his hand. The quicksand returned to the fish tank in the living room, and the magic spear was taken back into the storage space. "You don't need to compare with me, you just need to think about the strength gap between you and the Hulk. Think of one more, Tony Stark, whose armor can be constantly updated. The gap between you and him before. If you really meet a well-matched opponent, what can you do? Hold your small pistol, scrape the enemy on the side? Do you want other people to distract and protect you as an ordinary person? Don't let you. Chapter 79. Liu Xing doesn't want to drink water. "Of course, that matter has nothing to do with me. Don't look at me with such a look." Liu Xing was unwilling to go to this muddy water. Shield. The only difference from the winery in Conan is ... one is decent and the other is villain. And there is a characteristic on both sides. That is, there are more spies than those doing business. And to be honest, in the line of Alexander Pierce Hydra, before they started the Insight plan, these ... Hydra agents did it for. "Of course, that matter has nothing to do with me. Don't look at me with such a look." Liu Xing was unwilling to go to this muddy water. Shield. The only difference from the winery in Conan is ... one is decent and the other is villain. And there is a characteristic on both sides. That is, there are more spies than those doing business. And to be honest, in the line of Alexander Pierce Hydra, before they start the Insight plan, these ... Hydra agents are even better than the orthodox SHIELD in order not to expose them in advance. The agent is still a little better. Of course, this well-being is only relative to Luo Crossing. I care more if you say that. Natasha gave a wry smile, put down the beer can, and her graceful body leaned forward towards Liu Xing. "Can you tell me a little bit, Shield? Has the future disappeared? If you refer to the current Shield, the answer is..." Natasha leaned on the sofa and slowly closed her eyes, as if digesting it all. A minute later, Liu Xing looked at Natasha, who was motionless, wondering if she was asleep. "Perhaps I should really join you." Natasha closed her eyes and said, "According to Liu Xing, the future even Shield, it's hard to escape. So why bother to keep the name of this 10th level agent? By then, she will lose the name of the 10th level agent, and maybe she will only be the weakest Avenger." "Don't be so pessimistic. Think about Mum's face when he provokes Faxia, and be happy." Pouch. Natasha thought of something, and couldn't help but laughed out. "Since you called Nick Fury Mum's fuckman, all agents now call him that secretly. Is it right? It's not a brutal name. It's not better than Thomas ... Time and sounds much easier." Liu Xing shrugged and said, "Yes, Nick Fury is working hard on other curse skills after knowing it. ... He is really boring." Liu Xing was speechless. The two looked at each other in silence for a while. ... After that, Liu Xing took the lead in speaking. "To be honest, Nick Fury must regret giving you the authority of a level 10 agent." "Yes it is." Natasha nodded silently. If it hadn't been for the 10th level of authority to learn about Liu Xing's information, it would be impossible for her to believe those words so simply, and she would not be instigated. "Will you report the content of our conversation when you go back this time?" Liu Xing asked. "No. There is no such ... necessary." Natasha shook her head. Although Liu Xing verbally said that she is allowed to fight twice, if she chooses to report Liu Xing's affairs, as a double talk, I believe Liu Xing will never have any trust in her anymore. "What is your mission time?" Liu Xing suddenly thought of something and asked. "At most 1 month, after 1 month it will be my vacation time." "Well, Ruiwin has been busy with company affairs recently. Sky is also half-hearted except for the computer. Go and be Wanda's tutor." Liu Xing glanced at Wanda, who was studying hard not far away, and said to Natasha, "Sure. But I'm curious, how did that 10-year-old girl suddenly become so big?" Chapter 80. The new mission of the US team after the thawing. "Adaptation will definitely help the captain who just awakened," Natasha said with a light smile on the corner of her mouth. Then he made a mistake in his calculation. The word things means nothing to me. Liu Xing itself is a modern person, and there is no disconnection from the times at all. As for the people I know, the only person I know is Yi, Count as a former comrade in arms. But Yi is an old mortal who can extend his life without limit by absorbing dimensional energy, and Liu crossing. Adaptation will definitely help the captain who just awakened, Natasha said with a light smile on the corner of her mouth. Then he made a mistake in his calculation. The word things means nothing to me. Liu Xing itself is a modern person, and there is no disconnection from the times at all. As for the people I know, the only one is Yi. I count as a former comrade in arms, but Yi is an old mortal who can extend his life without limit by absorbing dimensional energy, and Liu Xing has nothing to Yi idea. Therefore, Liu Xing would never be like the American team. There are any unfinished dances, missed appointments, and missed people. Okay. Natasha stuffed the last piece of bread into her mouth, only to realize that Liu Xing was eating something different from her. What are you holding? Omelette. You can understand it as a kind of Chinese taco. Sky put cold seaweed, tenderloin, sausage, potato shreds, bacon. Liu Xing took a sip of milk, took out 2 napkins, wiped his hands, and stood up. Are you full? We can set off. Unfair. I want that tomorrow. Natasha took a look at the half of the omelette in front of Liu Xing with Kanyan, and swallowed. Why should she eat dry bread with jam? The gap is too big. Aren't you on vacation tomorrow? Liu Xing looked at Natasha in surprise. This guy won't plan to stay here forever, right? Can't you? Natasha smiled slightly, then looked at Sky. Please. No problem. As long as you are used to it. Sky nodded calmly. The witch Ruiwin and the invisible girl Susan seldom meet here because of work. Now that there is one more Natasha, it hasn't changed much for her. As for how their 2 companies are developing now, let's not mention their professional abilities for the time being. One can be invisible and the other can be transformed. With these 2 abilities, can the other companies still have the slightest trade secrets? Of course. The 2 of them are still a little bit ethical. According to the setting, the witch should be unscrupulous, but she failed to kill for the first time in the mutant world, and was stopped by Liu Xing, so now she has restored her original character. If others do not take the initiative to use some shameful means, they will not attack. Liu Xing just got up to go out. Natasha suddenly took out the makeup case from her bag and walked into the house. Wait a moment, borrow your bathroom. Okay, let's go. Just when Liu Xing thought he would have to wait for a half hour, Natasha walked out again. Yes, first-class agents makeup. The speed is also first class. There is a video to teach women all over the world, save their boyfriends. He just sat back on the sofa and stood up without warming up. Liu Xing couldn't help but uttered after he got up. Joked. I don't think you understand women at all. Natasha rolled her eyes when she heard the words, opened the door of her car, and sat in. No one knows women better than me. Liu Xing got into the co-pilot and said with a smile, you seem to be overconfident. Natasha obviously couldn't understand the words that only became popular after Sichuan Jianga more than 10 years later. The car did not drive to the outskirts of S.H.I.E.L.D. The branch stopped directly at Aegis Chapter 81. Let the Hydra play the Hydra. 2 minutes later, Natasha walked back with good news. That's it. Let's go out first. Don't disturb him. Liu Xing pushed Natasha out of the ward and gently closed the door. It's not that he cares about the US team, but if this guy is woken up, then his mission plan will be ruined. How is the captain? Sharon saw the 2 coming out and stepped forward to ask. Still not awake. 2 minutes later, Natasha walked back with good news. That's it. Let's go out first. Don't disturb him. Liu Xing pushed Natasha out of the ward and gently closed the door. It's not that he cares about the US team, but if this guy is woken up, then his mission plan will be ruined. How is the captain? Sharon saw the 2 coming out and stepped forward to ask. There is still no sign of awakening. Natasha smiled casually and replied, and then said, I'm sorry, I'm going to take Consultant Liu to perform a task. and take a step first. The two left the US team monitoring zone on the 3rd floor and went to the personnel department on the 5th floor. The list of available agents is here, you can pick it. Natasha walked to a laptop, typed in the password randomly, and then pushed the laptop in front of Liu Crossing. Don't rush this. I'll make a script first. Liu Xing minimized the list of agents and opened the document on the desktop. After half an hour, Liu Xing left the keyboard with both hands, and let out a long sigh of relief. I'm exhausted. You will be tired too. Natasha smiled and helped Liu Xing squeeze her shoulders twice, but her eyes kept staring at the computer screen. Are you sure this is to help the captain mentally and recover, not to crash him? Have you heard of using poison to fight poison? Liu Xing twisted his neck, stretched his waist, and pressed the printer switch next to him. Zzz. The scripts were printed out one by one. Okay, I have confirmed the main personnel, but everyone has to send a copy of this script, so don't expose it at that time. Liu Xing turned around and put a thick stack of scripts in Natasha's arms. Okay, I will let them read it carefully. Natasha hugged a pile and nodded silently. In Natasha to inform the various actors. At the time, Liu Xing took out his mobile phone and dialed the phone. Hey, Ru Iwin, here needs an Oscar for the best actor. You are really too much. After Natasha came back, she was speechless when she saw a person standing next to Liu Crossing. This person is exactly a member of the Roaring Commando that fought with the US team. She knew that this was definitely changed by the super powerful. Named Ru Iwin, nicknamed Demon Girl. Rywin, leave it to you, your name is Judith Johnson now. Liu Xing patted man, said on his shoulder. I got a message just now. Natasha sat on the chair and turned around. The trail of the Hulk has appeared again. When I show up, I'll show up. What else can I do? Liu Xing didn't care about it at all. It is reasonable to say that the task is generally a difficult reward, the better, and if it is not completed, it can be refreshed. He is now concentrating on his beauty affairs, where he can take care of Hulk, but he can use it, in case it happens to be Judadu. Hey, Captain shows signs of awakening. Natasha answered the phone, heard the report from Sharon on the other side. Her eyes widened and looked at Liu Xing. The meaning is very clear. You don't go. Rywin is gone. Haven't you found it? Liu Xing shrugged and said she didn't have a special agent's ID and fingerprints to unlock. How to get there? Natasha questioned halfway. Chapter 82, Steve is desperate. Captain, you are awake. When Sharon saw Steve walk out, she was a little surprised, and even forgot the script she explained just now. What are you doing to Peggy? Seeing the woman in front of him who was dressed similarly to Peggy, but was obviously not alone, Steve felt that his anger was on his head. Is this unclear whether you are planning to use this fake to deceive yourself after the brainwashing? Captain, your mood is a little wrong. Do you need a sedative? Several dressed in special black. Captain, you are awake. When Sharon saw Steve walk out, she was a little surprised, and even forgot the script she explained just now. What are you doing to Peggy? Seeing the woman in front of him who was dressed similarly to Peggy, but was obviously not alone, Steve felt that his anger was on his head. Is this unclear whether you are planning to use this fake to deceive yourself after the brainwashing? Captain, your mood is a little wrong. Do you need a sedative? Several SHIELD agencies wearing special black suits. The agent came up. Looking at these people in unfamiliar costumes, Steve immediately understand. These people are Hydra. Boom, boom, boom. A few people were knocked into the air, and Steve rushed out directly. When he left, he looked back and found that the place where he lived just now was a container, not a house at all. This feeling of being teased by being a pet made Steve's uneasy and frightened even stronger. On the 3rd floor in Hydra, after the agents dealt with each other for a long time, Steve discovered that the button next to the wall could open the elevator, looked left and right, and there was no one, and hurriedly pressed the elevator. Team leader. At this time, the people standing in the elevator were Liu Xing, Natasha, and a group of S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. Yes, Steve was about to do it when he suddenly thought of Judith. What you say to him, immediately, suffocated. Now the people in the elevator shouldn't know that he has not been brainwashed successfully, so as long as he pretends to have been brainwashed, he can be fooled. Since Hydra has control of everything, it is not a wise choice to go head-to-head. He believes outside there must be a resistance organization, and he must escape. Captain, are you okay? Your mood seems a little unstable. I'll call the medical department. Liu Xing looked at Steve, who was flustered, put his hand in his pocket, and was about to take out his phone. Do not worry. Steve grabbed Liu Xing's arm and took a deep breath. Long live the Hydra. Avengers assembled. Liu Xing responded to the slogan of the US team. Steve. Later, while Steve was still wondering what the Avengers were, the shield in the elevator, the agents all rushed towards him, tightly locked his limbs, and some even took out electric batons. Seeing a strong man in the US team, who looked like a big man, Natasha leaned on the side of the elevator and trembled, holding back a smile. Ding dong. When the elevator reached the first floor, Steve blushed and shook off SHIELD on him. The agent seized the door and fled and rushed out. Hi, the captain is really amazing. Can this be considered a work injury? Several agents took a cold breath and got up from the ground. What should we do now? Natasha looked at Liu Xing and asked. Follow-up. Steve ran aimlessly in the city, looking at the strangers around him. His heart became more and more horrible. Only the Cosmos Rubik's Cube studied by Hydra can change the world into another look in a short period of time. Hulk, stop him. Open fire. At the end of a street, Steve heard the sound of a firefight and gradually slowed down. Hulk. A giant green monster fell from the sky and fell in front of Steve. Looking at Hulk, Steve remembered Judith just now. What you said to him. Hydra tested a homemade super serum on Peggy Carter and turned her into Chapter 83. Hulk hates the rioting city. The top floor of the building. Steve Rogers leaned on the sofa and stared blankly at the uni-eyed black man in the corner of the room, who blended in with the darkness. So, you tell me, what the man said just now is false. Yes. We are worried that you will not be able to accept reality after waking up, and you will have mental illness. And he proposed that plan. Nick Fury walked out of a dark corner of the room after closing the curtains. What is the truth? Steve asked stiffly. The top floor of the building. Steve Rogers leaned on the sofa and stared blankly at the uni-eyed black man in the corner of the room, who blended in with the darkness. So, you tell me, what the man said just now is false. Yes, we are worried that you will not be able to accept reality after waking up, and you will have mental illness. And he proposed that plan. Nick Fury walked out of a dark corner of the room after closing the curtains. What is the truth? Steve asked stiffly. He is tired of asking this sentence, and he doesn't even care about the truth anymore. You won, and we won. But you have slept under the Arctic glacier for 70 years. Nick Fury walked up to Steve and stretched out a hand. Welcome to the new era, the once hero. Oh, I missed a date. Steve nodded lightly, expressionless, and ignored the handshake request. Can't you accept it? Nick Fury hung his hands in the air, frowning slightly. There is nothing like Peggy turning into a green monster. The world is ruled by Hydra, and I am even more unacceptable to live in a virtual world. Steve raised his head and smiled at Nick Fury. This shock is really nothing more than that. Although Peggy is now a tiny nitty 809 years old, at least she has spent a normal life. Steve feels a pity, but she can only accept it. It seems that Leo's plan is still very effective. Nick Fury turned around with a smile, took a can of iced coffee from the small freezer, and threw it to Steve. I don't like coffee. Steve caught the coffee, put it on the table, and looked at Nick Fury. I just want to know, where is that guy now? I'm going to thank him. He went to find the green monster in your mouth. Nick Fury picked up the coffee that Steve didn't want, pulled the tab and drank it by himself, and I advise you not to trouble him. He is much better than you, in all respects. Hulk. Roar. In the middle of the city, a green humanoid monster, a grey ferocious monster, stood in the middle of the road and shouted at each other. All the passers-by abandoned their cars and fled, screaming and screaming. "Bronsky, you must go to a military court." On the helicopter in the air, General Ross yelled at Abomination. In order to get revenge, this idiot was injected with Hulk serum that had not been tested in the downtown area of New and turned into a monster. "Today next year will be your birthday, Rose." Disgust yelled at the helicopter in the sky. "Rose, it seems that Bronsky has not lost his subjective consciousness like Bruce Banner, but his IQ has also become lower. Try to catch it." Looking at the soldiers on the plane who hated cerebral palsy, General Ross glared at them and made a decision. "If you can say that the death day is a birthday, it seems to be another 50 in intelligence. Pedestrians have almost withdrawn. Open fire." General Rose glanced down and said to the soldier next to him. A-1 missile was shot directly at Abomination. Hulk, seeing the hatred, the Hulk remained motionless, roared and leapt over. Boom! Hulk jumped into the air and directly intercepted the missile that was fired at the hatred, with a resounding Chapter 84, destroying device. Seeing Liu Erxing appear, Hulk turned around and yelled at him. He still vaguely remembered that this person seemed to have experienced an unforgettable feeling of being out of his body more than a month ago. That feeling has nothing to do with strength, making him feel instinctively afraid. So Hulk didn't want to fight Liu Erxing, and just wanted him to leave with a roar. Boom! When Hulk turned his head to look at Liu Erxing, disgust came and punched him directly. Sneak attack is not a good habit. Seeing Hulk flying towards him, seeing Liu Erxing appear, Hulk turned around and yelled at him. He still vaguely remembered that this person seemed to have experienced an unforgettable feeling of being out of his body more than a month ago. That feeling has nothing to do with strength, making him feel instinctively afraid. So Hulk didn't want to fight Liu Erxing, and just wanted him to leave with a roar. Boom! When Hulk turned his head to look at Liu Erxing, disgust came and punched him directly. Sneak attack is not a good habit. Seeing Hulk flying towards him, Liu Erxing touched the ring he had just brought to Wanda's room. A portal flashing with sparks appeared right in front of him. Hulk flew directly into the portal. As for the exit at the other end of the portal, where is Hulk? Abomination suddenly heard the Hulk's roar behind him, and suddenly his brain went down. Didn't he just hit Hulk to the east just now? Why did he come from the west again? The hatred was punched to the ground, the whole ground collapsed, and the layers of cracks spread 10 meters away. There's no end to it. Seeing that the cracks were almost spreading to his home, Liu Erxing waved his hand, turned a portal, and put the ring back into Wanda's bedroom. At the same time, Liu Erxing directly turned on the Ascension mode and rushed between the two. On the one hand, the Forbidden Army Swall appeared in a circular ring around Liu Erxing, and Hulk and the fists of Abomination hit the shield of the Forbidden Army Swall at the same time. A huge shockwave smashed the surrounding glass. "You are really enough." Liu Erxing scattered away from the wall of the Forbidden Army, grabbed the legs of the two and jumped into the sky, spiraling into the sky. Roar! Hulk, in the air, the reacted hatred and Hulk struggled violently. "You get out of here first." Liu Erxing threw the Abomination down with his backhand, and at the same time, the wall of the Forbidden Army that had just dissipated below was reformed into rows of sand soldiers with long spears, holding them high to the sky. No matter how hard the sand is, it can't break the Hulk and hate defenses, but it can be with magical powers. Roar! Being pierced by countless spears, blood splattered, screamed in disgust and pain, frantically waved his fists, and smashed the surrounding sand soldiers into sand. "It looks like you can't remember to eat or not." In the air, watching, the Hulk who was struggling and even trying to beat him, Liu Erxing directly slapped him on the forehead. Boom! Hulk just felt his soul shake and fell into a deep sleep. What followed was the soul of Bruce Banner. Where am I? Who? Bruce Banner looked at the panorama of the city below in horror, said, "I have a task for you. Let's talk about it." Liu Erxing threw the Hulk down, and followed him. "No, help." The banner mode in the form of the Hulk made a tragic cry for help in the air. Boom! After falling to the ground, Dr. Banner stood up in confusion and glanced at his sturdy green hands. "Roar, Hulk, you trash. I want to kill you. Kill all of you." The hatred full of blood came to the Hulk step by step. "Help. Don't come here." Even though Dr. Banner now has the body of a Hulk, he doesn't have the guts to keep backing away. "Little friend, what's your name?" Chapter 85. Headshot falling from the sky. One turned over and jumped to the top of Abomination's head, and slammed down. The Edman alloy in the mutant world is different from the vibration gold in the main world. Roar. Abomination was dizzy from being smashed by the destroyer, and with a roar, he punched a car parked on the side of the road. The car spun with flames and flew towards a house. The family in the house who was watching the war outside through the window suddenly revealed. One turned over and jumped to the top of Abomination's head, and slammed down. The Edman alloy in the mutant world is different from the vibration gold in the main world. Roar. Abomination was dizzy from being smashed by the destroyer, and with a roar, he punched a car parked on the side of the road. The car whirled and flew towards a house with flames, and the family in the house who was watching the battle outside through the window suddenly showed a look of horror. Hulk. A green figure suddenly jumped out and knocked the car into the air with a punch. Hulk's consciousness returned, and Banner's consciousness was suppressed again. "Hulk, you deserter, is finally back." Disgust shook his dizzy head, ignored Liu Xing again, and rushed towards the Hulk who had just appeared. Seeing the two muscular monsters hugging together again, Liu Xing suddenly felt his head big. It seems that it is time to practice the fairy mode. Liu Xing shook the Humanking device in his hand and muttered to himself. Having a durable sandbag seems to be a very beautiful thing, but it also indirectly shows that Liu Xing's power is not enough. "Green thing, get out of the way." "Hulk." The Hulk glanced at Liu Xing in fear, jumped aside obediently, squatted on the ground, and beat the ground twice. At the same time, a roll of sand dust hovered around Abomination, instantly turning into a circle of sand soldiers, and the spear was pierced into Abomination. "Roar!" Disgust screamed, waving his fist. The fist wind pierced through the air with a terrifying sound. However, when his fist was about to touch the sand soldiers automatically scattered and turned into flowing sand. A punch on the quicksand is the same as a punch on the water. It is of no use. After the fist passed, the sand soldiers returned to their original state. "It seems we can start." Liu Xing took a deep breath and tried to open the portal without the help of hanging rings. Zizzy. After consuming most of the magic power, Liu Xing finally opened a portal on the top of Hateful Head. When using the hanging ring, the consumption is almost zero, and without wearing the hanging ring, even if it is a dimensional walker like Liu Xing, it will increase the amount of consumption. Perhaps the hanging ring is equivalent to space. The key to this room door, and Liu Xing now chose not to use the key, and forcibly broke the room door. As for why Liu Xing did not choose to use the convenient key, naturally because, in many cases, the key is used. There are many limitations to opening the door, and once the key is broken, it will be finished. Just like now. Boom. Liu Xing stepped on and jumped into the sky. After reaching a height of several kilometers, he fell quickly, and the target was hatred. Roar. Disgust was entangled by the sand soldiers, swaying his fist wind vigorously, without knowing that a meteorite was about to fall on his head. This is the consequence of the lower IQ. It seems that the abhorrence still maintains the consciousness and memory of the Bronsky humanoid period, but in fact his brain is still inferior to Hulk. Boom. Liu Xing turned into a meteor from the air and fell, but the attack did not fall on Abomination, but a head. Got into the portal. The power of the Great Wilderness Starfall has an absolute relationship with the time of the fall. During the fall, the speed and strength will continue to increase. Therefore, theoretically falling on the edge of the planet's gravity. Liu Chapter 86. Signature Dimension Walker. Seeing Liu Xing return to the ground, squatting on the side with his head kept shrinking, the forgotten Hulk jumped over. What? The passers-by who came around just remembered that in addition to hatred, there was another monster, showing horrified expressions. They can only pin their hopes on Liu Xing, hoping that he can prevent this monster from killing them. What do you want to do? Liu Xing frowned suspiciously as he watched Hulk dancing and dancing. Hulk. The Hulk took a look. Seeing Liu Xing return to the ground, squatting on the side with his head kept shrinking, the forgotten Hulk jumped over. What? The passers-by who came around just remembered that in addition to hatred, there was another monster, showing horrified expressions. They can only pin their hopes on Liu Xing, hoping that he can prevent this monster from killing them. What do you want to do? Liu Xing frowned suspiciously as he watched Hulk dancing and dancing. Hulk. The Hulk glanced at the crowd of people rushing at the end of the street, and danced his arms as if he wanted to express something. Oh, I probably understand. Liu Xing still didn't understand what Hulk's mentally retarded expression meant at first, but when he followed Hulk's gaze and looked behind him, several groups of soldiers with weapons rushed over and immediately understood. This is your choice, don't blame me. Liu Xing waved his hand, and a portal appeared next to him, and the magic power that had just recovered in his body hit the bottom again. Hulk. Seeing the portal appear, Hulk jumped in. On the other side, it is the icy and snowy Arctic Ocean. I always feel that Hulk's IQ has become higher. After the Hulk left, Liu Xing felt a little strange touching his chin. Hulk just gave him the feeling like a pet dog. Moreover, according to the original Hulk's brain that knew how to smash, he shouldn't understand the mechanism of the portal at all. How could he run over and beg him to open the door and send him away? Part of it. Liu Xing recalled the Green Doctor in Avengers 4, feeling that this kind of conjecture was extremely possible. Put down the weapon and raise your hands. While Liu Xing was thinking, a group of soldiers surrounded this place and aimed their guns at Liu Xing. No, you idiots, he saved us and saved you. What are you doing? Point your gun at our hero, you trash bastards. Monsters appear and you all disappear. The monsters are driven away. You are here. Cowards. Seeing the actions of these soldiers, all passers-by and residents around screamed, showing what is called elegant and easy-going. Shut up. The second child prepares tear gas to disperse it. The captain of the soldier squad glared at the passers-by and shouted orders. Boom, boom, boom. His order had just been issued, and his subordinates fell to the ground one by one. What did you do, monster? Looking at the squad that was wiped out by the entire army, the captain looked at Liu Xing in horror, and tremblingly raised the rifle in his hand. I advise you to put down your martial arts. A voice came from behind. Who are you? His accomplice to save him. Seeing a woman in a tights suddenly appeared behind him, the soldier captain was immediately frightened. The muzzle was shifted. Let down your weapons, soldier. This is not where you should be. Natasha took out a document from her pocket and threw it to the soldier captain. And Natasha glanced at the captain with contempt. I'm saving you, not him, idiot. She is almost certain that if it hadn't been for her to bring a team of 1 SHIELD agents arrived in time and used anesthesia bombs to solve these ... for the dead soldiers, the next thing will definitely develop in a direction that no one wants to see. The army of fools are even more short-sighted than politicians, and they can't tell who the enemy is. Chapter 87. The whip for free in an instant. Liu Xing was slightly taken aback after hearing the little girl report herself to her house, and then smiled and took the notebook. Today is really a good day. I even met 2 Spider-Man in a row. It's a pity that neither Peter Parker nor Gwen Stacy seem to be too young to trigger any tasks. As for while Liu Xing guessed that he was too young, it was not that his ability was not awakened and he didn't trigger because his Jiao Wang reached now and he didn't trigger the task. Pietro aside, as the Scarlet Witch, Wanda is the absolute main character. Liu Xing was slightly taken aback after hearing the little girl report herself to her house, and then smiled and took the notebook. Today is really a good day. I even met 2 Spider-Man in a row. It's a pity that neither Peter Parker nor Gwen Stacy seem to be too young to trigger any tasks. As for while Liu Xing guessed that he was too young, It was not that his ability was not awakened and he didn't trigger because his Jia Wang reached now and he didn't trigger the task. Pietro aside for the time being, Wanda, as the Scarlet Witch, is one of the absolute main characters. And now Wanda not only gained the ability to use chaos magic, but also the ability to modify the probability of variance also awakened with that trip. But this is the case. Wanda didn't trigger any tasks here in Liuo Crossing. Then Liuo Xing can only guess that it has something to do with age. After all, Wanda seems to have grown up, but the actual age is still only about 10 years old. Hello, Iron Man, Dimension Walker, M. George Stacy, Chief of the New York Police Department. While Gwen was holding Liuo Xing's signature and admiring it over there, her father came over. Just call me Liuo, that. The code name I used to coax children. Liuo Xing smiled and said, I'm afraid this won't work. Maybe tomorrow your citizens with the title of All Button will know it. George pointed to the reporters who were shooting at them in the distance, and said, it's up to you, anyway. People who know each other usually don't use code names. It's too embarrassing. Liuo Xing said it doesn't matter. Aren't you worried about exposure? Chief George asked in surprise. It stands to reason that superheroes should not all be knights who wear all kinds of fancy clothes to cover up their true identities. At least not in the comics. You may have watched too many comics and movies, and you have a wrong perception, pretending to be pigs and tigers. The times have passed. Liuo Xing pointed to Tony who was talking in front of reporters not far away, and said, yes, I don't like those guys in tights. They cover their faces just to escape responsibility. George glanced at Tony, retracted his gaze, and said to Liuo Xing earnestly. Liuo Xing saw at a glance what the chief of the police station wanted to express. He laughed and said, don't look at me like this. I can accept all the arguments, but if someone wants to kidnap me morally, what will you do? As long as I have no morality, no one can kidnap me morally. Liuo Xing looked at the damaged ground around him and kicked the gravel under his feet. I hope no one will let me compensate for these losses. Otherwise, Liuo Xing will let that person know what is the real loss. The Hulk was teleported away, which meant that Liuo Xing already had the coordinates of the Hulk on Earth. He can open the portal at any time and throw the Hulk into the bedroom of Sumion's home, so that he can feel what love is like, a light so green that you panic. It seems I want to convince Gwen not to treat you as an idol. The smile on George's face gradually disappeared, and his values were different. Whatever, you might let her worship Tony Stark. Liuo Xing shrugged, saying that it didn't matter. Director George looked at Stark and thought of his Lace News. His face darkened. There is nothing good about superheroes. After cursing in a low voice, George turned and picked up little Gwen, and was about to leave. Remind you, what can often save the world is these bad things. Chapter 88, Cheating with Wanda. After solving the whip, Liuo Xing took off the ring and returned it to Wanda. After a word of warning, he walked out of her bedroom. I'm not a kid anymore. After Liuo Xing left, Wanda pursed his mouth and turned back and muttered. After returning to the bedroom, Liuo Xing took a change of clothes and walked into the bathroom. Washed by the shower, Liuo Xing relaxed and checked the harvest this time. First of all, it is naturally the poor eye to the master, whip the classmates. Although Ivan Vank played less than a minute, Taiwan. After solving the whip, Liuo Xing took off the ring and returned it to Wanda. After a word of warning, he walked out of her bedroom. I'm not a kid anymore. After Liuo Xing left, Wanda pursed his mouth and turned back and muttered. After returning to the bedroom, Liuo Xing took a change of clothes and walked into the bathroom. Washed by the shower, Liuo Xing relaxed and checked the harvest this time. First of all, it is naturally the poor eye to the master, whip the classmates. Although Ivan Vank played less than a minute, the line was just Tony Stark, but his contribution is undoubtedly great. In Liuo Xing's eyes, The rewards obtained for completing the whiplash task were even more practical than hateful. Especially Liu Xing had just acquired a painful Edmund alloy destroyer not long ago. Weapon Reforged Box Whip Description: this is a consumable item and can only be used once. Details: put any weapon into the weapon reforging box. After 1 minute, the weapon will be reforged into a random whip-type weapon. The weapon material remains unchanged. Multiple weapons can be put in, and the characteristics of all weapons will be integrated. What a practical prop! At least in the future, Liu Xing's wall will not be luxuriously hung an Edmund alloy fire extinguisher. As for the whip-type weapons, they are not smooth to use. Liu Xing said that this is not a problem. Call. Liu Xing dried his hair and returned to the bedroom in a bathrobe. He hasn't forgotten. And there is another task reward that he has not checked. If the difficulty of the mission of Abomination is only 10, then the difficulty of the mission of the US team is at least 0. If it wasn't for Steve who just thawed and woke up, if there wasn't the entire shield with the cooperation of Liu Crossing. The novel Brain Hole script, it is really hard to make him despair. This can be said to be the right time and place, and it is indispensable. According to Liu Xing's guess, the difficulty of the task is related to the reward, that break, leap warship. It is definitely not an ordinary thing. Nightmare Fusion, Leaping Ship Description: this is a personal spacecraft that integrates a variety of well-known warships. The only flaw is that it is small in size and does not carry enough energy to launch continuous attacks. Details: of 5 special abilities. Force Field Barrier, consumes 0 per second, 5% energy. In the fold, a solid defensive barrier is placed around the leap battleship. Quick Fold, Jump, consume 1% of energy. Instant Fold, jump to the designated location. Purification Beam, consume 50% of the energy. Use the orbital beam to lock a unit, and carry out continuous tracking bombardment. Planetary Fragmentation Cannon, consumes 99% of energy, and compresses and gathers for 10 minutes, launching a beam of destruction in front to sweep everything. Dark Matter Transformation, in the cosmic environment, 5% energy is automatically restored every month. Very simple 555 abilities, respectively defense, movement, single attack, group attack and recovery. Of course, Liu Xing would not take it out now. On the one hand, there is no place to put it, and on the other hand, it is temporarily useless to take it. He doesn't need interstellar travel for the time being. What does he want the spacecraft to do? As for the purification of the beam and the planetary fragmentation cannon, it consumes too much. It is too troublesome to restore the energy and need to put the spacecraft into the cosmic environment. Moreover, for the time being, it seems that no enemy needs to use these 2 attack methods. The next morning, Liu Xing pressed Chapter 89 The Power of Chaos Blade. Natasha leaned forward, observed these 2 weapons, raised her head and wondered, why is there a long chain of chains attached to the back? Easy to mowing. Liu Xing picked up the Chaos Double Blade, weighed the weight and feel, it seems that Q and I have some fate. Now even the weapons are the same. The whip-type weapon seems to be the most suitable for Liu Crossing. In fact, if it's a chain sword, it's okay, but then, it's a bit feminine. Who is Q Ballard? Natasha leaned forward, observed these 2 weapons, raised her head and wondered, why is there a long chain of chains attached to the back? Easy to mowing. Liu Xing picked up the Chaos Double Blade, weighed the weight and feel, it seems that Q and I have some fate. Now even the weapons are the same. The whip-type weapon seems to be the most suitable for Liu Crossing. In fact, if it's a chain sword, it's okay, but then, it's a bit feminine. Who is Q Ballard? Natasha asked suspiciously. Another person with a world record similar to mine, but he is much worse than me. Liu Xing explained. After all, in this world, he not only has Guyi as a comrade in arms, but also has no relatives or friends, so he will not be grasped by the gods at all, and he will not be played by the gods as chess pieces like Q Bouncy. Similar to your record, he must be terrible. Natasha thought of Liu Xing's information, and took a breath. It's normal. In all dimensions, bald heads are terrifying creatures. After speaking, Liu Xing subconsciously touched his head, and found that there were no traces of hair loss, and he was relieved. Can you take me next time? Hearing Liu Xing mention other dimensions, Natasha couldn't help but speak. What will bring you next time? Liu Xing didn't react for a moment, and looked at Natasha suspiciously. Go to other dimensions, just like you took Agent Coulson last time. Natasha looked at Liu Xing expectantly. Since even Coulson can go, she is herself who has surrendered half of her life. I should be able to go too. I want to. Sky also whispered from the side. It's okay. Actually, you won't be so curious and yearning after going there once, and other dimensions are not much different from here. Liu Xing smiled helplessly and nodded in agreement. Marvel's main world itself has technology, magic, aliens, and gods. Contains various types of elements. This is why Liu Xing said so. If you want to find exotic customs and cultures, go directly to other countries, other planets. For example, Ionia, which Liu Xing is going to go to this time. If you really want to feel the customs similar to that side, you can go directly to Karmitage and stay for 2 days and it will be over. But if they want to go, then take them once. If they don't witness a dimensional journey with their own eyes, even if they listen to others say more, they will still have a trace of doubt in their hearts. Going once can also broaden your horizons. I don't know when they will be used here. Liu Xing glanced at the street outside. The destruction of the Hulk and Abomination yesterday was nothing but a small mess for this city. Within a few years, there will be an alien invasion. Get ready. I'll take you there in the afternoon. Liu Xing took a deep breath and said to Natakai. He is no longer alone. Naturally, he can't be the same as when he destroyed the Olympus god. At that time, barefoot people were not afraid of wearing shoes, relying on the power of the war stars and the immortality of the mortal will. Even without Gaia's help, they could solve it alone. Therefore, more power is needed. Destroying is always easier than guarding and creating. So anxious. Natasha was stunned. She thought Liu Xing was referring to next time. It is an unknown number, and the result has now reached being prepared for danger in times of peace. Liu Chapter 90 is a good show when it comes. He summoned Yumi one after another, teleported it nearly 10 times, using the magic tome of the door, and finally arrived at a small coastal country very close to Ionia. And his purpose this time is also there. According to locals, as long as you go to the port and take a boat, you can reach Ionia in less than an hour. Liu, time is coming, we can go. Liu Xing said to gather together Natasha and Sky. He summoned Yumi one after another, teleported it nearly 10 times, using the magic tome of the door, and finally arrived at a small coastal country very close to Ionia. And his purpose this time is also there. According to locals, as long as you go to the port and take a boat, you can reach Ionia in less than an hour. Liu, time is coming, we can go. Liu Xing said to gather together. Natasha and Sky knocked on his door at 12:30 and 12 seconds, and began to urge. Liu Xing opened the door and found that the two were fully armed, wearing tights, and carrying various secret agents. Natasha is fine. Why are you dressed like this? Liu Xing looked up and down. Sky, this look was ... and SHIELD Bureau. It looks a bit similar in the agent. I was worried about dragging you back, so I asked for something as a self-defense. Sky patted the special pistol and miniature shock shell around his waist. Liu Xing saw that they were so prepared, and nodded. Remind you too, the place we are going is called Ionia. The Asian culture over there is very similar to ours here, and they have their own beliefs and culture. If it is not necessary, don't destroy anything, and don't stir up trouble. I have something to do this time, not to take you to travel. The two listened carefully to Liu Xing's words and remembered them in their hearts. At the same time, they nodded their heads. We know. Try to read as much as possible and say less, right? Just as the two of them tensed their nerves and looked at Liu Xing, waiting for him to start the teleportation, Liu Xing suddenly remembered something. and stopped. The coordinates I transmitted are in the palace of a small country. Be careful when you arrive, in case we are found out. We just rush out. Liu Xing had to confirm his location every time after using the door magic book to transmit. If it is a big city, he can know the specific location immediately, but if it is a small city like this time, he will either find someone to ask or find a local map. In the small kingdom where Liu Xing was located, ordinary civilians were illiterate. He could only break into the palace directly, find the map to confirm the location, and met a maid who told him how to get to Ionia Kingdom. What did you do last time? Natasha looked at Liu Xing in surprise. Is it to steal the treasure or the princess? Maybe not. Ready? Liu Xing did not answer Natasha's words, glanced at the two of them, and launched an extra-dimensional teleportation. Boom! The gate of the castle towering high in the center of the kingdom was knocked open by a tall swordsman wearing armor all over. The swordsman entered the door and stood aside, giving way. Behind him, the general of this war, the Hand of Noxus, Dreus strode in with the black cleaver. It's over, hand over the crown, no killing. Dreus walked under the light, looked at the king on the throne, and his few remaining guards, and said, "The crown was born with me, and I bleed the blood of the noble royal family." The king looked at the soldiers walking towards him, his voice getting smaller and smaller, and was finally taken away from the crown. Throw it into the furnace. Boom! Why is it so hot here in summer? As soon as Liu Xing landed, he pulled his collar and was a little confused. Who are you, a mage who can send magic in groups? Dreus looked at the three people who suddenly appeared, three in surprise, and clenched the giant axe in his hand. Liu Xing turned his head and glanced at the furnace, only then did he understand why he was so hot. This almost fell in. Liu Xing anxiously. Chapter 91 Permanent Immortal Mode. Vasta Yexiari. In the rented boat, Natasha finally couldn't help but speak. I'm going ashore soon. You'd better keep a low profile. Liu Xing looked at the land in the distance, felt the surging natural energy in it, and took a deep breath. Understood. Isn't it just trying not to provoke trouble and disturb your business? Natasha curled her lips, and Liu Xing had said this many times since before she set out. She learned from the 10th level secret, Coulson. In the rented boat, Natasha finally couldn't help but speak. I'm going ashore soon. You'd better keep a low profile. Liu Xing looked at the land in the distance, felt the surging natural energy in it, and took a deep breath. Understood. Isn't it just trying not to provoke trouble and disturb your business? Natasha curled her lips, and Liu Xing had said this many times since before she set out. She learned from the 10th level secrets that when Coulson followed him last time, she bought a lot of souvenirs and went back. But she was unlucky. Then she brings a little something this time. There will be nothing to do when she goes back here. Guessed. The boatman docked the boat on the shore, and after watching the Liu Xing trio 3 come ashore, he reminded, this is a place occupied by Noxus. If you are looking for Ionians, you need to go deeper. Thanks for reminding. Liu Xing nodded and turned to look far away. Indeed, as the boatman said, the natural energy of this place occupied by Noxus has been lost due to logging and mining. Originally being at the edge of the continent, the natural energy was weak, but now it has passed away, and it is naturally not a good place for cultivation. Let's go. Time is precious. Liu Xing took out his phone and looked at the time, and set the alarm clock by the way. Where are we going without asking for directions? After walking for nearly half an hour, Sky supported his legs tiredly and asked, the environment here is indeed good, but it also means that the roads are bumpy. In addition, Liu Xing was constantly on the road, let alone Sky. It was. Natasha, a trained agent, also felt a little tired. There is a market in front. Forget it. Just here. After boarding a huge boulder, Liu Xing looked into the distance for a while, then jumped down again. He came here only for natural energy, and didn't want to contact people. Forget it, I want to buy some souvenirs. When Natasha saw Liu Xing sitting on the ground by herself, she was stunned and said hurriedly, do you have money? Liu Xing glanced at her and asked a fatal question. The last time Coulson was able to bring so many souvenirs back, it was because of Good Luck Sisters who paid for them. This time, who helped them pay for Natasha was speechless for a moment. She even forgot that this is another dimension, and currency is not universal. And this is a magical world, and there is a high probability that gold and silver are worthless here. Then I can only take some pictures and go back. Sky shrugged to Natasha, took it out, and began to photograph this alien forest. I have repeatedly reminded the two of them many times before. Liu Erxing believed in their hearts, closed his eyes directly, connected to Ionia's spiritual realm, and began to absorb the amount, preparing to incarnate Vasta Yexiari, and enter the permanent fairy mode. In the spiritual realm, Liu Erxing wandered in a peaceful forest. Every time he took a step, the natural energy around him would pour into his body like bubbles. I don't know how long it took. Liu Erxing felt the saturation of the natural energy in his body, and he also seemed to walk to the center of the forest, in front of a big tree full of flowers. Click. Someone Chapter 92, True Silver / Yukong / Should you not call your companion down? Experience baby. Liu Erxing returned his gaze to Akli, admiring the mermaid line around her waist, and said, if she hadn't appeared in time, Liu Erxing would have gone straight back after solving the appearance problem. Wouldn't it be that she had missed the Onsen Lifetime non-main world mission? He is not my companion. And, what do you call me? Akli frowned. Should you not call your companion down? Experience baby. Liu Erxing returned his gaze to Akli, admiring the mermaid line around her waist, and said, if she hadn't appeared in time, Liu Erxing would have gone straight back after solving the appearance problem. Wouldn't it be that she had missed the Onsen Lifetime non-main world mission? He is not my companion. And, what do you call me? Akli frowned, caught the rebounding sickle, and gradually leaned down like a predator. Experience baby. I have never heard of it, but it is obviously a contempt. Boom. A smoke bomb was smashed on the ground by Akli, a black mist gradually filled, and her figure was also covered. There are more than 300 acupuncture points on a person, you can't protect them. Akli's voice came from the fog, but her figure still did not appear. Do you think you are not cutting it again? Ninfa, my home is in the capital. Liu Erxing looked at the dark weapons around him, spit out a word in his mouth, loosened the double blade in his hand, and unlocked the chain. Whoosh! A shuriken grazed from Liu Erxing's forehead. Your life is about to close. Another ridicule came from the black fog. Wow! Liu Erxing smiled helplessly, then shook the chaos double blades violently. A sword aura that broke through the space ripped the darkness apart. Liu Erxing saw it. Bang! Ah! A cry of pain came from the black mist. Liu Erxing rushed directly, dragging the figure away from the black mist. It's over. I don't know how to rub balls. I don't know how to open Gundam. You are also called a ninja. Liu Erxing threw Akli, who was bound by the chains of the Chaos Blade, under the tree, and said with a smile, ha. Winner and loser. Akli turned her head and said no more. She knew the strength of the person in front of her, and she definitely couldn't fight it by herself. Although I didn't want to. This time it seemed to rely on the annoying old man again. Trigger the Ionia series of missions within 1 hour. Each time an Ionia hero is defeated, a related reward will be randomly awarded. Defeated Shadow Fist Outlier Stingakli, get the reward Flying Thunder God's Art. Balance is not destroy, outsider. The black mist dissipated, and Shin, who had just transferred to Akli by the forbearance method, appeared in front of Liu Crossing. What is equilibrium? Liu Erxing looked at Akli and asked. I don't know, and I won't tell you. Akli snorted coldly. Don't call the spur of the outlier after you have been captured, but call it a retreat. Liu Erxing rubbed Akli's head while smiling, and said, you. Akli's face flushed under the mask, and she didn't know whether it was shame or anger. It seems that you have no regrets at all. Shin watched Liu Erxing coldly as he rubbed his junior sister's head, but didn't mean to rescue Akli first. and directly took off the double knives behind him. "Know that I come from another world." Liu Xing looked at Shen and suddenly said, "Then how no one can destroy Ionia's balance in front of me?" A hint of surprise flashed in the eyes under Shen's mask, and then immediately calm was restored. "I mean, there is also a guy in my world who likes balance. He is called Thanos." Student Xiaobaba is committed to destroying half of the life in the universe in order to achieve the balance of the universe. Chapter 93 The Captive Female Ninja. Akli looked at the broken sword in Shen's hand and was stunned. Although she has left the balanced sect, she was once one of them. The soul blade is the token and weapon of the head of each generation, and now she has broken the soul blade. Watching carefully at the broken soul blade in front of him, his eyes were briefly lost, and after a short period of hesitation, he squatted down and picked up two broken swords. "You still have a sword, continue." Liu Xing withdrew the blade of chaos, and the chain wrapped around his arm again. Soul blade is about the balance of Ionia's two realms. It can't be. Akli looked at the broken sword in Shen's hand and was stunned. Although she has left the balanced sect, she was once one of them. The soul blade is the token and weapon of the head of each generation, and now she has broken the soul blade. Watching carefully at the broken soul blade in front of him, his eyes were briefly lost, and after a short period of hesitation, he squatted down and picked up two broken swords. "You still have a sword, continue." Liu Xing withdrew the blade of chaos, and the chain wrapped around his arm again. Soul blade is about the balance of Ionia's two realms, and it cannot be damaged. Shen squeezed the two broken swords tightly, staring at Liu Xing with dim light in his eyes. "Since it's broken, why not find 502 glue for you and stick it well?" Liu Xing could see that Shen had lost the will to fight, and he simply dispersed the blade of chaos, and watched him with his hands on his shoulders. What measures? The soul blade must be immediately. Send it back to the shrine for restoration. Akli, he'll go one step ahead. Shen took a deep look at Liu Xing, and after speaking to Akli, who was blank, his hands began to seal. After a burst of sunlight gleamed around him, Shen's figure disappeared. "He just drove away just like that, so he wouldn't be afraid that I would kill you." Liu Xing turned to look at Akli. "I'm just a renegade traitor. How important is the soul blade that protects balance?" Akli seems to be used to Shen's absolute calmness. Facing the fact that she has been abandoned, she has no emotional fluctuations, and shrugs to Liu Xing. "If you want to kill me, do it, hurry up." Having said that, her body couldn't help but lean down, and her eyes kept flashing to the two of Sky and Natasha not far away. "Want to take hostages and leave in this case? You got fooled." As soon as Liu Xing spoke, Akli took advantage of the moment when he seemed to be distracted, and pounced in the direction of Natasha and Sky. What is this? Akli fell to the ground, convulsing, while looking hard at what she had just stepped on. Why can a small black box emit such a large current, directly paralyzing her muscles all over her body? My lord, times have changed. Liu Xing stepped forward and shut down the small high-voltage electric bombs that Natasha and Sky had arranged long ago. If the electricity continues like this, it may be banned. Poor girl, depending on your physique, let's lie down for at least 2 days. Natasha stepped forward, smiled and took the booby trap that Xing handed back, pressed the valve, and stuffed it into the pocket of her tights. The booby trap itself is actually to be cautious, but I didn't expect that. The powerful ninja broke off a sword and ran away. On the contrary, it was Akli, the girl ninja who was given to him, who dared to launch a second attack and wanted to hijack the two of them. What should I do now? It's not good to leave her here. Sky looked at Akli, who was unable to move, and moved her compassionate heart. This place is like a virgin forest, and I have encountered many beasts along the way. If my whole body is paralyzed and left here for 2 days, it must have no bones. Find out if she has any money, and take you the Chapter 94 Spiritual Blossom Festival. Allegiance. Liu Xing looked at the man in the hat sitting in the corner, walked to the opposite side of him, and stood still, because no one will come to me except the enemy. The man slowly stood up holding the sword, and the hat slipped from the top of his head, his exposed eyes staring at Liu Xing. "A strong man, what do I have with you? If you admit defeat, you can leave, otherwise, fight to fight and surrender again." Liu Xing faintly looked at the man holding the sword and said, "Ionia hasn't been held for a long time." Liu Xing looked at the man in the hat sitting in the corner, walked to the opposite side of him, and stood still, because no one will come to me except the enemy. The man slowly stood up holding the sword, and the hat slipped from the top of his head, his exposed eyes staring at Liu Xing. "A strong man, what do I have with you? If you admit defeat, you can leave, otherwise, fight to fight and surrender again." Liu Xing faintly looked at the man holding the sword and said, "Ionia hasn't held the Spiritual Blossom Festival for a long time, I don't want to spoil ... I give up." The man with the sword stared at Liu Xing for a while, and found that Liu Xing was not joking, so he retracted the sword and returned it to its sheath and turned around. Instead, he was the one he used to be. Even if the Spiritual Blossoming Festival was turned upside down, he would still compete with the person in front of him, but now he has changed. Once Ning's Buan was just a joke, surrendering can solve the trouble, so please give him more. As for that person who seems to be carrying a ninja of the sect of balance, what does it matter to him? So decisive. Liu Xing looked at the man with the sword who turned away and was a little surprised. He was originally prepared to do his best to solve the battle within 10 minutes, but he didn't expect that he actually gave up. Ionian missions within 1 hour. Every time an Ionian hero is defeated, one will be randomly awarded a related reward. Defeated Yasuo, High 8 Swordsman, will be rewarded Extreme Ghost Swordsmanship Slashing Iron Style. Extreme Ghost Swordsmanship Slashing Iron Style. Description: Crane Swordsmanship. Practicing to the extreme, you can increase your teammates' critical strike damage by 25%. Details: after attacking the enemy, expose the enemy's weaknesses and flaws. After extracting the task rewards, Liu Xing glanced at the time one last time, and there were 6 minutes left, so he probably couldn't meet anyone else. What about the money? Liu Xing found Natasha and Sky, but found that the purse placed on them was empty. "We just bought a flower that glows." Natasha motioned for Sky to take it out. Sky nodded, and took out a wooden box from the backpack. After opening it, there was a pink petal yellow stamen flower lying quietly in it, with a little light emitting from the flower. "I think you are being treated as outsiders slaughtering guests." Liu Xing looked at the two silently and said, he is now very keen on natural energy, and he can clearly sense that this flower is not rare, and even some civilians passing by around him have the breath of this flower on his body. "No way." Sky was a little surprised. "I think that old grandfather was very kind just now. Just ask this little ninja girl." Natasha pointed to a klee who Liu Xing was carrying. Sky held the box and handed it to a klee and gave her a look. "This is a blooming spirit flower. It is indeed very rare. Ionia hasn't bloomed for more than 10 years. A klee looked at the flower, suddenly remembered something, and moved her paralyzed right hand with difficulty, and grabbed Liu Xing's clothes. "It's the last time of today's Spiritual Blossoming Festival, a place. Please, not going to lead us into some trap, right?" Natasha looked at Akli suspiciously. "No, I just want to see my father and friends again." Akli hurriedly explained. "Goodbye, this Spiritual Blossoming Festival will not be the Zongi Yuan Festival. Hi Aki Xing." Liu Xing was a little surprised. The name of the Spiritual Blossoming Festival sounded good, but it turned out to be a ghost festival. Spiritual Blossoming Flower is a bridge between yin and yang. "Please. I can do things for you. 1 year assassination, or something. It's okay." Seeing Liu Xing unmoved, Akli suddenly became a little anxious. "Is it far? We don't have much time left, and we are about to return to the original world. It's not far away, it's just a little secretive, and it will be there soon. Chapter 95, Sky Who Hungers for Power. After returning to the main world, Natasha said to Akli, "Go ahead." Facing Akli's questioning eyes, Liu Erxing nodded. Her ninja costume itself is not too strange, even better than Steve's American Alice. The clothes are all normal. But that is also the battle suit of the US team. The one who usually walks out in that way is not a performance artist. The air in this world is a bit unpleasant, it looks like a book. After returning to the main world, Natasha said to Akli, "Go ahead." Facing Akli's questioning eyes, Liu Erxing nodded. Her ninja costume itself is not too strange, even better than Steve's American Alice. The clothes are all normal. But that is also the battle suit of the US team. The one who usually walks out in that way is not a performance artist. The air in this world is a bit unpleasant, it looks like the Zuan area recorded in the book. Akli followed behind Natasha and sniffed. The two arrived at the temporary residence Liu Erxing borrowed next door, and Natasha took the laptop from the sofa and put it on the table. "You choose by yourself, tell me which ones you like. I can let Liu Erxing help you pay for it." Natasha originally planned to say that she could pay for her. But after another thought, this little ninja girl is now loyal to Liu Erxing. What is her business? Why is she wasting her money? This is the shop. Akli tried to hold the mouse, quickly became familiar with the operation, and began to choose. "This vest is good. Don't need skirts, it will affect your activities. If you don't have a face mask, then buy a mask. It seems to look good." "What is phosphor?" Soon, Akli selected several sets of clothes, and under Natasha's gesture, he sent the bill to Liu Erxing. On the other side, Sky and Liu Erxing were alone in the same room. "Did he?" Liu Erxing glanced at the bill sent on the phone and paid the bill speechlessly. "My parents are still alive. Why I can't find them?" Sky sat on Liu Erxing's bed in confusion. For so many years, she has learned hacking techniques while hacking into various databases, and has never found her parents' information. She always thought that her parents were no longer alive, but now she is in another world. She learned that her parents are still alive. "In fact, sometimes the truth is not good, but I will not stop you. Besides, after all these years, don't you still live well?" Liu Erxing put his hand on Sky's shoulder, and comforted. "You are right." Sky looked up at Liu Erxing, pursed his lips and nodded. She really didn't need to force it. In case she found out that her parents had abandoned her, or that her parents were imprisoned criminals, it would be better to keep the status quo. "Live for yourself. Do whatever you want." Liu Erxing poured Sky a bite of chicken soup. "What I want to do ... I don't have that ... can." Sky's eyes gradually dimmed, his head. She has her own power, even if it is not comparable to Liu Erxing. She can at least be like the Invisible Woman and the Magic Woman, and she will not be a logistics hiding in the car. "Actually ... you have a gene like Ruiwin in your body, but if you don't unlock it, it will never show up." Liu Erxing hesitated a little, and decided to tell Sky about her situation. "I'm a mutant too, are you kidding me?" Sky was stunned after hearing Liu Erxing's words. "No, there are no mutants in this world. I just said that your situation is similar." Liu Erxing shook his head. "Mutants and alien races, regardless of origin or ethnic ability." Chapter 96 Mortgage. Instant body. "You dress up." I feel like calling Kaisar, Ari, and Evelyn. They can all form a group. Liu Erxing looked at a trendy dress, feeling more eye-catching than the original ninja costume. "What's wrong?" "This suit is very convenient for assassination." Akli took off the mask, picked up a bun, and stuffed it into her mouth. "It's nothing. Whatever you want." Liu Erxing shook his head and said no more. I checked something on the computer called yesterday." "Ah." "You dress up." I feel like calling Kaisar, Ari, and Evelyn. They can all form a group. Liu Erxing looked at a trendy dress, feeling more eye-catching than the original ninja costume. "What's wrong?" "This suit is very convenient for assassination." Akli took off the mask, picked up a bun, and stuffed it into her mouth. "It's nothing, whatever you want." Liu Xing shook his head and said no more. I checked something on the computer called yesterday." Akli wiped her mouth, put down the tableware in her hand, took out a stack of documents from behind, and handed it to Liu Xing. "I want to open a convenience store." "Ah, where did you get this idea?" Liu Xing took the file and took a look, and looked at Akli with a puzzled expression, feeling very strange. "What I said, I have to support myself, and I can't eat free meals." With that, Akli picked up another bun. "I told her that this street belongs to you, so she is going to ask you to borrow a place, open a convenience store, and pay you back slowly after earning money." Natasha helped to explain. "But the problem is, you said you only help me do things for 1 year, right?" "1 year? The chances of earning money are very high and not enough." "You still have it," Liu Xing kindly reminded him after a simple calculation. "Then extend it." "I don't care," Akli said decisively. "This is your own proposal, you won't regret it." With a word, it's hard to chase a horse fresh. "Then I agree." Liu Xing snapped his fingers and said, "At first glance, that contract is..." Akli wrote it herself. "It is more of a contract than a contract." What surprised Liu Xing was that Akli chose loan. Obtain the ownership of the facade directly instead of renting it out. This means that the bulk of the repayment she has to face is not the initial storefront rent and commodity purchase price, but the mortgage. As for how long it will take to repay the mortgage, Liu Xing hasn't calculated it, but it is estimated that if Akli is not allowed to break the contract, she will have to explain it here for the rest of her life. "You are lucky. There is a convenience store on the corner of this street. It is said that the business was originally good, but now it happens that you can take over directly." Liu Xing took out the real estate certificate that had been pressed for an unknown period of time from under the sofa. After turning a few pages, he pulled out one. "Okay, I will go later, and strive to open my black gold store within 3 days. Akli glanced at the sample photo that Liu Xing handed over, and shook her fist, looking very motivated. "Black gold, you might as well call it Black Heart Store." Liu Xing couldn't help but vomit. He just watched Akli's convenience store project, and apart from anything else, the marketing aspect is simply troublesome for his scalp. In a small convenience store, there is still 20%. This means of recurring discounts. I don't know if she checked the data yesterday on Google or so tired. A female bodybuilding outfit walked back from the outside with a sweaty head, and threw herself on the sofa without moving. In order to exercise, Sky finished breakfast early, and then immediately, after going out for a run and running around Queens, he came back exhausted. "Come on for exercise. I promise you can become the Whitebeard of the new era after the Ascension Ceremony." Liu Xing looked at Sky's tired look and encouraged him. "What is a Whitebeard? Why should I be a beard?" Sky hid his head in the sofa pillow and asked in a muffled voice. "That. You Chapter 97, SHIELD and the Hammer." Liu Xing was a little surprised. Originally, shield. But there is no such idea. Is it that Thor has returned to his place? This is just a guess, based on the description and photos over there. As for research, the time that the hammer appeared was 22:38 and 59 seconds last night. SHIELD. I learned the news was 1 minute ago, Nick Fury recounted calmly. The two most grateful for Nick Fury's agent career, one is Carlo. Liu Xing was a little surprised. Originally, shield. But there is no such idea. Is it that Thor has returned to his place? This is just a guess, based on the description and photos over there. As for research, the time that the hammer appeared was 22:38 and 59 seconds last night. SHIELD. I learned the news was 1 minute ago, Nick Fury recounted calmly. The two people most grateful for Nick Fury's agent career, one is Carol, the other is ... Leo Crossing. The two let his eyes stop confining to the earth, knowing that there are aliens and gods in this world. So you haven't sent anyone in the past to just rely on the photos taken by the Gwalu people, and you post on Twitter, presuming that this is Thor's hammer. Liu Xing held the phone with a speechless expression on his face. No, we happen to have an agent there on vacation, so the information we get is absolutely reliable. When Nick Fury said this, he suddenly realized that he seemed to be digressed by Liu Xing, and he almost forgot his original purpose. Immediately, changed his words, "I'm going to let Coulson take a small team over. Are you interested in seeing it? You said that Coulson led the team. What does it have to do with me? Don't forget, you are still Shield of consultants. They still hold the consultant's salary every month." Nick Fury reminded. "Then I will resign and pay you all the salary." Liu Xing chuckled lightly and said, I mean, as a special advisor, you can move freely after the past, which is equivalent to a public travel. Nick Fury's face was not flushed and his heartbeat immediately changed the statement. He originally thought that Liu Xing would be very interested in the Thor's hammer in Norse mythology, but he did not expect Liu Xing's attitude to be so calm. "Write out Sky's information. I'll go and see it." Liu Xing glanced at Sky, who was lying on the sofa, and said to Nick Fury, "No problem." But she just hung up the name of a field agent at first. No one would pay attention. Nick Fury was taken aback for a while. He didn't expect Liu Xing to make such a simple request. He just vaguely remembered that he and Coulson had persuaded a young hacker to join SHIELD and be a driver for Liu Crossing. If it weren't for Liu Xing to mention it again, he almost forgot what Sky's name was. "Then go log me out, too." Liu Xing did not back down. Sky is now ready to accept the power awakening, and he will surely be able to stand alone by then. If there is another SHIELD bureau hanging by then, the name of an agent cannot be protected by SHIELD. No idea. After all, in the original timeline, Sky became a 10th level agent like Nick Fury and Natasha, the top existence. Sky was not as transparent as Liu Xing, and was fooled into being a tool man. "No problem." Nick Fury nodded directly and agreed. "Yes, Agent Manoff recently took a vacation on your side, right?" "What's wrong?" Natasha, who was having breakfast, found Liu Xing's gaze toward her, and tilted her head in confusion. Nick Fury said, "Your vacation is over." Liu Xing handed the phone over and looked at her innocently. "What? I just started." Natasha's eyes chased Chapter 98, Unqualified. Say unqualified. Both Hydra and Hydra are very efficient. Just 10 minutes after getting off the plane, all the crowd's onlookers eating melons were driven out of the neighborhood. Next, after a simple attempt to drag a hammer with a car to no avail, it took another 20 minutes to build a three-story defensive building with hard plastic and steel bars. On the second floor of the defensive building, Liu Xing, Coulson, and Black Widow stood at the window, looking at the SHIELD bureau below. "Scientists are testing the hammer with various instruments. You have seen it with your own eyes. So is this true?" Both Hydra and Hydra are very efficient. Just 10 minutes after getting off the plane, all the crowd's onlookers eating melons were driven out of the neighborhood. Next, after a simple attempt to drag a hammer with a car to no avail, it took another 20 minutes to build a three-story defensive building with hard plastic and steel bars. On the second floor of the defensive building, Liu Xing, Coulson, and Black Widow stood at the window, looking at the SHIELD bureau below. "Scientists are testing the hammer with various instruments. You have seen it with your own eyes. So is this true?" Natasha asked. Coulson's gaze also turned to Liu Crossing. "Yes, and I guess the owner of the hammer should be nearby." Liu Xing nodded. The hammer and Thor were thrown onto the earth one after the other. Because Thor landed a few minutes earlier, he should have just left the hospital now. "Let's go down and take a look." Coulson watched the researchers gradually withdraw from below, and said to Liu Crossing. Three walked downstairs, and the scientific researcher took the recorded documents and put them in the car. Liu Xing can clearly see that the expressions of several people are very exciting. Among them, Hydra wants to take away for research, but can't hold it at all. Now it is estimated that he is holding the materials to ask other researchers. Coulson glanced briefly at the report handed over by the scientist, and found that most of it was nonsense, and then returned it dry. Walking to the hammer, Coulson looked at Liu Xing and Black Widow. "Men first, please." Natasha put her arms around her shoulders, as if she was watching a play. "Well." Coulson nodded, then bent over to grasp the handle of the hammer. "Okay." Coulson sighed, riveted his full strength, tried all directions, and found that he couldn't even turn the hammer over. Unscientific. This hammer is inserted into the soil diagonally. If it is really heavy, then as long as it is pushed to the left, it should fall down. Natasha looked down at the motionless hammer, lost in doubt. "You can guess it is Thor's hammer. Do you still want to talk about science?" Liu Xing rolled his eyes and said silently, "Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, also known as Meow hammer, weighs less than 40 kgs. The reason why it can't be lifted is simply because not qualified." "Hey, I'm exhausted." Coulson wiped the sweat from his forehead, loosened his hands, shook his head and said, "No, I can't move at all. I wonder if someone stuck it with glue in a prank." "Try it, maybe you are qualified." Liu Xing looked at Natasha. He vaguely remembered that in the original timeline, everyone in the reunion played Sword in the Stone with a hammer. Only the Black Widow did not participate in the game. In the comics, both the American team and the Black Widow were once qualified to lift Thor's hammer and obtain the power of thunder. The US team moved a bit while raising the hammer, and finally raised Thor's hammer during the final battle. The Black Widow didn't try. Whether it was the pen, it was impossible to verify, because the Black Widow at that time had already sacrificed herself for she. However, in Liu Xing's thoughts, the American team was able to lift the Thunder Hammer because of his spirit. Even without serum, he could pounce on a one grenade to protect his teammates. In the way Odin wants Thor to change. The test of the child's qualifications should be justice, sacrifice, humility, and perhaps one more. Chapter 99. The Thor who runs when you meet. Natasha's head was a little big when she heard it, and she shook her confused head. "Odin." Liu Xing spit out these two words and looked at the two of them. "This time it is concise enough to understand." "Understood." Coulson nodded slightly, thought a little, and said, "You mean, Odin cast the spell so that other people can't lift this hammer, but you ignored that spell." "The analysis is good. Completely correct." Natasha's head was a little big when she heard it, and she shook her confused head. "Odin." Liu Xing spit out these two words and looked at the two of them. "This time it is concise enough to understand." "Understood." Coulson nodded slightly, thought a little, and said, "You mean, Odin cast the spell so that other people can't lift this hammer, but you ignored that spell." "The analysis is good. Completely correct." Liu Xing gave Coulson a thumbs up. This is Odin is not qualified to think. Liu Xing is not qualified. The human version. Therefore, no matter whether Liu Xing has noble character and pure heart, it has nothing to do with him picking up the hammer. The same goes for Hela, who can crush a hammer. "Have you met the master of this hammer?" Natasha looked at the hammer that Liu Xing randomly played with, and asked. "Of course." A stunned green. "It should still be the same now." Liu Xing casually threw the hammer back to its space. To be honest, you can't research anything. The two science and technology trees are not the same, unless you want to start from scratch. "I will consider the suggestion." Coulson nodded, and at this moment, his cell phone rang. After taking out his mobile phone and taking a look, Coulson looked at the two with joy. "We found someone who recorded all the astronomical phenomena here in a few years. It's nearby, a 30-minute drive away." Liu Xing nodded. So. "We can find her, use her information to analyze. Maybe we can find the owner of the hammer in your mouth." Coulson looked at Liu Xing and said seriously, "I think it's possible that you can meet the owner of the hammer directly." Liu Xing said, "You mean, the owner of the hammer and the writer of that day were in the same place?" Natasha stroked her chin and thought for a while. "It is indeed very possible that, since astronomers have been recording here, then she was very likely to be the first discoverer that night, but she was not. This shows that before the hammer fell, she encountered another thing that had to make her stop observing and leave here." Liu Xing took Natasha's words and applauded. "Yes, The analysis is basically correct. Then let's go. Coulson pointed to his car outside and asked tentatively. In an ordinary family-style bar, 4 people, 2 young women, an old man, and a blonde man, are enjoying lunch around the table. The same way. Beer and chicken rolls. At this moment, a group of men walked in and sat down and started talking. Did you know that you missed a good scene? I heard that there were satellites, which landed on it. The satellite is so heavy that no one can lift it up. I was there at the time. People from the Bureau of Investigation said that there are radioactive materials in the satellite, but I actually touched it with my hands. Really? You can try the craft tonight? Maybe some part of yours will mutate. Ha 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 ha. A few rough guys were drinking and chatting loudly, but the content of what they said made the blonde man's face slightly changed and smiled. The man stood up, smiled at the other people, and walked to the rough guys who were chatting. Ask, that satellite, where is it? On the west, 50 kilometers from here in the desert. It was not a few alcoholics who answered the man. Chapter 100. The Undocumented Myth. Jane, Daisy, and Dr. Shavig were all dumbfounded, staring at the ceiling blankly after the portal disappeared. Can't your movements be small? Natasha reluctantly said to Liu Xing, and then looked at Coulson. We can only clear the scene as a tool. Let's act. Sorry, ma'am, your tavern has been temporarily expropriated. We will compensate it in time. Others please immediately leave. Warn 3 times. Soon, Coulson and Natasha were. Jane, Daisy, and Dr. Shavig were all dumbfounded, staring at the ceiling blankly after the portal disappeared. Can't your movements be small? Natasha reluctantly said to Liu Xing, and then looked at Coulson. We can only clear the scene as a tool. Let's act. Sorry, ma'am, your tavern has been temporarily expropriated. We will compensate it in time. Others please immediately leave. Warn 3 times. Soon, Coulson and Natasha cleared their surroundings. Tor, it seems that you have lost your supernatural power, as well as your courage. Liu Xing walked to Thor, who had fallen to the ground, and spoke. How did you leave your father's seal? Thor turned over, sat on the ground, looked up at Liu Xing, and asked. At this moment, he knew he had no chance to escape to pick up the hammer, and he could only accept reality. A coincidence. Liu Xing looked at Thor. Then how did you get kicked off? I think he made a mistake. He thinks I made a mistake. I am weaker than him, so I was deprived of supernatural power. Thor sat on the ground, playing with the wool on the carpet, and laughed mockingly. Wait, are you talking about drama? Daisy heard the two say seal over there. Supernatural power. Words like this suddenly couldn't help but interject. No, it's true. If I still have a chance to get Mjolnir, I can let you see. Thor turned his head and smiled at Daisy, then the smile dissipated and looked at Liu Xing. However, there should be no chance. You are going to kill him. When Jane heard Thor's words, she looked at Liu Xing in shock. My father Odin sealed him in the atrium for hundreds of years. Although I don't know when he broke the seal, it shouldn't be long. Thor slowly stood up and walked in front of Liu Xing. Then, give me a soldier's method of death, and transform it. Liu Xing slowly raised a hand and punched Thor on the bridge of his nose. Oh! Thor clutched his nose and fell to the ground. You still haven't learned to speak in an equal tone. It seems that you haven't changed at all. Liu Xing snorted coldly and said, What should we do now? Coulson walked to Liu Xing's side and asked in a low voice, Didn't he want a hammer? Take him there. Liu Xing glanced at Thor, who was rubbing his nose, and said, After half an hour, everyone came to the blockade of Thor's hammer. So, he is Thor in Norse mythology. And the hammer is Thor's hammer. Minna. Looking at the excited blonde brawny downstairs, Daisy turned to look at Coulson and asked, Miss, you have already had 12 questions in half an hour. We brought you here for research, not for questions. Coulson said helplessly, Those fairy tales I heard when I was young turned out to be true. Dr. Shavig's white beard took out a book of Norse mythology from his backpack and turned a page. Boom! There was a thunder in the sky. It is reported that there are a lot of electromagnetic waves around the object, and our communication equipment has been severely disturbed. A panicked voice came from the research room behind Coulson. I believe this weird phenomenon. Jane Volkswagen specializes in scientific research.